Hello and welcome to 6 part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had a Bio Booster Armor Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you'll never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Katsuki Bakugo waited impatiently, shaking with pent-up frustration. Even though he had the chance to force Deku into the tiny utility closet, he was not entirely convinced that he was in the mall. No, one person had forced him to go, and for some reason, she had asked him to help them. Somehow, he was unable to say no. She had asked him politely to assist in reuniting Deku and Momo after looking into his eyes. Katsuki's initial impulse was to tell her to get lost outright. However, he said, okay, which continued to bother him. Why couldn't he refuse her? Her quirk was not to manipulate people. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he hardly noticed the girl standing beside him. She smiled sweetly and kindly and said, "They are on their way, Katsuki. Are you ready?" Katsuki pretended to be hostile as he said, "Yes. Let's get this over with. I have better things to do than hang out in this place all day." He couldn't help but like it when she kept smiling at him. I don't know why. On the other side of the mall, Momo Yaoyorozu walked with Kyoka Jiro, Toru Hagakure, and Tsuyu Asui. It had taken a long time to persuade Momo to accompany them to the mall, and now they needed to encourage her to do so. Izuku was nearly dragged by Mina to the designated spot on the opposite side of the mall. He initially told her that he wasn't sure if he could accompany her to the movies. Mina persisted, though, and now he was present. Fumikare Tokiyami, concealed behind a display, was past. He texted the others while he reached into his pocket. He then slipped out of hiding and went around to join the others, saying, "Target on his way." Mezzo Shoji was waiting at a small store that Momo's group passed at the same moment. Additionally, he texted that Momo was en route. When it was clear, I left the store and went to the food court by the movie theater. Everyone knew by the time the two naive teenagers each went to the food court. When the two first saw one another, Momo wanted to turn around and go, and Izuku wanted to follow suit. He was at the mall with Mina, and she couldn't face him. Katsuki Bakugo shoved Izuku into the small closet that Honto Shiro had just opened before either could respond. Shiro slammed the door after Ochako Araraku did the same to Momo. From inside the closet, Momo yelled, "What are you doing?" Inside the closet, she found herself pressed up against Izuku. In such a small area, there was hardly enough space for both of them. Mina stood near enough to the closet door for them to hear her say, "You two are going to talk this out." She took a step back and grinned widely. "Now, Momo, you tell the truth to Izuku. Do not lie anymore. Until then, neither of you are coming out of there until you do. Kyoka, it is your turn." Kyoka Jiro walked over to the door and plugged her earphone in. She would only mention the essentials, like that they were back together. Izuku was standing inside the closet, Momo standing next to him. Izuku shook his head in response to Momo's command to activate the Guyver and kick this door open. Izuku grimaced after saying, "I can't. If I do, you will be pushed against the door and it could hurt you." He decided to ask and added, "Not as badly as you hurt me when you dumped me." "What did Mina mean that you lied?" Momo closed her eyes, swallowed, and looked down. Momo whispered, "I lied to you." She knew that Mina or Toru would confess if she didn't. "When I told you that I believe that being a heroine means that I cannot be with you. That I would not be able to be one if we continued being together. I lied. I never believed that bullshit." Izuku asked her what she meant. Izuku asked, "Then why did you break up with me?" And Momo opened her eyes again. She was looking into his eyes with tears running down her cheeks. "Because when I thought you had died at the tower, it killed me. It felt like my heart had been ripped from my chest," Momo said with sorrow. He reached up and gave her a gentle pat on the cheek as she sobbed, saying, I was scared, Izuku. Afraid that, what if one day you are taken from me?" Blotting back the tears, she enjoyed his caress. She sobbed, throwing her arms around his neck and giving him a tight hug, saying, "I do not think I could handle that." Izuku clung to her, unwilling to let her go, saying, I cannot promise that might not happen. It could happen to any of us at any time. But I cannot. I do not want to be. I love you, Momo, and I cannot see a future without you in it. No, not now." Momo looked directly into his eyes and begged him to do something to prevent her from lying again. I cannot. No there is, oh please stop me from saying something I do not mean." Leaning in, he gave her a kiss. When their lips met, Momo's resistance, uncertainties, worries, and fears vanished. She gave him a deeper kiss and drew him closer to her. Momo kissed him again after whispering, "Please never leave me." He nodded as she smiled slightly and said, "And promise me if I ever am that stupid again, do not believe me." 0. Kyoka grinned as she unplugged her earphone from the door outside the closet. She turned to face the other people and declared, "Mission accomplished." Winking slightly at Shoto Todoroki. The quirker of ice fire flushed. Shoto went pale when she said, "Okay Shoto, let's go see that movie." Following Shoto's, "All right," response, Kyoka moved in closer and took his hand, guiding him to a movie theater. Katsuki burst out laughing. Katsuki turned to go, yelling, "Ha! Another in our class that is totally whipped." However, his arm was touched by a hand. "You could take me to see that movie, if you want." Ochako asked him with a smile. Katsuki shook his head negatively and blanched. As Ochako reached down and took his hand in hers, Katsuki glared at the other people observing and asked sharply, "Why would I want to do that?" Her fingers entwined with his. Instead of jerking his hand away as everyone had expected, he let out a sharp exhale. Ochako continued to smile at him and said, "Because I want you to." Katsuki allowed her to guide him to the movie theater. The others remained silent out of concern that Katsuki would become irascible and start raving, once it's sufficiently distant. Mina shrugged and smiled as Toru pointed to Ochako and Katsuki and asked, "When did that happen?" "Who the devil knows?" They both laughed when Mina said, "I didn't think that." Well, that Katsuki even liked girls. As the others started to leave, Shiro unlocked the closet door and cracked it open an inch so Momo and Izuku knew they could come out when they were done with whatever it was they were doing. Mina had to listen to her friend gripe about how everyone else in the class seemed to be getting together and she still couldn't find a suitable boyfriend. Mina told Toru that she seemed to be experiencing the same issue. When Izuku looked at the brighter light coming from the now unlocked door, he whispered, "They unlocked the door, I guess we can go." Momo was holding Izuku tightly and refused to let him go. They had recently reconciled, and for the time being, all she wanted was for him to be wrapped around her. "No, not just yet." Momo tightened her grip around him and whispered back, "I need you to hold me in your arms for a little longer." Izuku was very tempted to have sex, but he vowed not to tell anyone because of the closet's small space. He told her repeatedly that he had slept in the woman's bed, but they didn't have sex, and that he had remained completely loyal to her, saying that he had no intention of being with anyone else. Momo believed him, even though he didn't have to tell her, and an hour later, they reluctantly left the closet to find that none of their friends were present. "I guess they deduced that we got back together," Momo said with a small smile, her right hand intertwined with hers. Unpredictable events. Katsuki Bakugo sat through what he thought was a movie that only women or idiots would like. A lot of action, destruction, and mayhem. To make matters worse, he paid for both Ochako and himself. Desperate to get out, he was about to do so when Ochako took his right hand and put his arm across her shoulders, leaning against him as he watched the film. He lost all resolve in that moment, especially when she smiled at him. He muttered, not understanding how this girl seemed to have the ability to make him do things he did not want to do. Outside the theater when the movie was over, the two noticed Izuku and Momo heading out of the mall. They were holding hands. "Well, it seems that your idea worked." Ochako scowled at Katsuki as he said, "Big Boobs and Deku are back together." "Don't refer to her that way. That was impolite and unkind." Katsuki grimaced as Ochako proclaimed, "I apologize." Katsuki whispered, "I won't call Yaoyorozu that again," and Ochako gave him a stern smile before guiding him through the mall and out the door. He stammered and grinned slightly, greatly perplexed as to how or why Ochako could do this to him. Taking the heroes on, Izuku, who had been back together for about 2 days and wanted to spend a lot of time with Momo, could not help but stare at her as the others were being paired off to face the teachers after the written exams were finished. As the students were told which teacher they would be facing, Izuku, who was now in the Guyver, hardly paid attention until he heard something that both confused him and Melissa. "Wait, hold on, are Melissa and I not facing All Might together?" Principal Nezu grinned up at the armored teenager as he asked. "No, All Might wants to evaluate Miss Shields' skills to the fullest extent possible." Izuku, who was the only one not chosen to be paired with anyone, looked at the other pairs as Nezu remarked, "If you are paired with her then, he will not be able to test her to her fullest potential. So, who will I be paired with and who will I face?" Mr. Iwaza responded to Izuku's question, because it appears that everyone else has been assigned to face a hero. We anticipate that a few of the students will not complete their challenge. It has been agreed that you can choose one of them to be your partner at that point. Izuku grimaced as he wondered who he would be competing against in the challenge. We have decided to withhold that information until you have selected a partner, Iwaza informed him. Izuku watched as Momo and Shoto Todoroki dominated Iwaza inside the monitor room. It took Momo some time to come up with a plan to beat him, though, because she had been shaken by her defeat at the sports festival, the incident at the Expo, and her fear of losing him. She overcame her insecurities and came up with the perfect plan. Izuku left the monitor room after congratulating her, and he had to choose between 4 people who had failed the challenge: Mina Ishido, Denki Kaminari, Eijiro Kirishima, and Rikido Sato. So which one of these 4 are you going to give a second chance? Izuku examined each of the 4 students who had failed the challenge as Iwaza pointed to them. Rikido appeared to be recovering from his sugar rush. He looked exhausted and weary, and Eijiro looked at Denki before shaking his head. Iwaza scowled at Mina and the other 4 as Izuku said, "I guess Mina Ishido." Mina grinned widely. "Miss Ishido, if you should pass, you will have another chance. Don't fail this time, you'll be 1 step ahead of the 3 others." Mina grimaced as Iwaza told her, "But you will still attend remedial training with the others that had failed the practical exam." She had hoped to avoid the remedial training when they went to the training camp the following week. "Now go with Mr. Midoriya, your challenger has requested to gauge your abilities Midoriya and will meet you at training area C." He told them, and they both left. Izuku explained to her on the way that he had chosen her, and that it wasn't because they were friends, though that might have influenced his choice. When they arrived, they were informed of their opponents, and they both let out sharply. Momo exclaimed, "You have to be kidding me," as she saw the individual Izuku and Mina were going to confront in the monitor room. Principal Nezu grinned widely as she said, "I barely stopped myself from swearing in front of the students and teachers gathered in the televised room." Nezu said, "Yes, Endeavor has volunteered to challenge Mr. Midoriya." Kyoka, who was standing next to Momo, turned to look at the back of the sizable room where Shoto Todoroki was staring at the screen that was focusing on his father. She slipped past the others to stand next to him, and as he stared, his face was utterly stoic. She gave him a gentle shoulder rub and grinned at him. "How are you?" Shoto turned to glance at Kyoka Jiro as she whispered. Kyoka giggled as Shoto responded in the same low voice, "I am fine." "Come on Izuku, kick his ass." Shoto smiled slightly. "Taking the good fight. Well that sucks," Mina said, staring at the closed door. "I was hoping that if I did well enough then I would not have to attend the remedial training." She attempted to smile but simply shook her head negatively when she was told who Izuku and Mina would be facing just outside the training area. "As of yet, we have not lost. Recall the words of Mr. Iwaza. Endeavor must want to test the Guyver armor's strength. Mount. Lady told me that agencies are interested in me, and I suspect that." Mina looked at Izuku bewilderedly as he said, "So he has come to check me out." Izuku grinned before activating the Guyver, which meant that he would likely come after me and ignore you entirely. That will work against him. She realized that, while Endeavor concentrates on Midoriya, she can win the challenge. She nodded, then grinned, and the door opened. Once inside, you bolt to the best cover you can and then try to make it to the exit portal. It will take the pink girl 5 minutes to make it to the exit portal going that way, Endeavor said, ignoring Mina as she slid across the ground as quickly as she could with the acid from her special designed sneakers. "So I have that time to test your full capabilities," the pro hero said calmly, then unleashed one of his fiery blasts without warning. Jumping to one side, Izuku evaded the blast. "Not bad, your reflexes are quite impressive." Firing another blast and watched as the armored teen side cartwheel to the left away from the flames. Lunging forward, Endeavor charged at Izuku, throwing a fiery punch straight at the teen's chest. Blocking the blow, with his left, Izuku kicked Endeavor in his own chest with his right foot, flipping backwards and hitting Endeavor with his left armored foot. Reeling, the larger man laughed. "Good." The pro hero rushed towards Izuku again, unleashing blast after blast of his flames, but Izuku dodged them all, grabbing Endeavor's right wrist with his right hand and slamming the man into a nearby park bench. "That girl is a good 3 minutes away from ending this, and still you have only shown me some of what you can do," Endeavor said, grinning broadly as he increased the heat and melted the weighted bands off his wrists and swung a metal telephone pole off its mount and swung it at Izuku with a snap of his arms. Standing Endeavor took a deep breath as the flames engulfed him. Come on, bring your full capabilities to bear or I will have to force you to. Zero. We should stop this, Iwaza grimaced up in the monitor room. The teacher whispered to Principal Nezu, one of them could get hurt. The rodent administrator shook his head. No, Endeavor wants this and I believe that no matter how much of his quirk he uses he cannot actually harm young Midoriya. Principal Nezu whispered back, keeping his eyes on the monitor. Let them continue until Miss Ishido makes it to the exit portal. He added and Iwaza continued to frown. In the back of the room another was frowning as well. But Shoto was not really concerned about his father being harmed in any way. In truth he was hoping his father did get hurt. Not because of what the elder Todoroki did to him or his mother. No, it was because the other day his father confronted him about Kyoka Jiro. Demeaning her relentlessly, stating that it was fine if Shoto wanted to sire some wild oats with the plain-appearing girl, but he needed to consider someone that would provide a child someday that not only inherited his powers of ice and fire, along with perhaps some raw enhanced strength. That pissed Shoto off. He had no intention of following his father's advice on that. He cared and liked Kyoka immensely and would not mind their relationship being like Momo's and Izuku's. Without the problems. Glancing over at Kyoka. Maybe we could go outside for a moment in the hallway. Shoto whispered, I have a question for you, and Kyoka nodded, unsure of what he was asking. Zero. Izuku decided that his best defense would be to continue avoiding the blasts and hope Mina reached the portal sooner than Endeavor had anticipated. You cannot avoid my fire forever, boy. Izuku wondered as he dodged another blast if the Guyver could withstand a direct hit by Endeavor's inferno, but he didn't want to find out. You must fight me in person at some point. Endeavor, thinking Izuku was acting impulsively and without a plan, snarled as he fired another flaming blast, narrowly missing the armored team. Izuku thought about his options while avoiding another blast. He could fly upwards, but he was afraid that Endeavor would turn his attention to Mina at that moment and be prepared as he moved to intercept. He was still tired of seeing if the Guyver could withstand the high temperature the pro-hero was creating, so a direct attack was not an option. What counters heat? Of course ice, but that was not available, Izuku asked himself. Looking over 50 meters, he saw a fire hydrant. All I have to do is let him maneuver me over to it. With a plan in place, he managed to avoid another flame burst. As he reached the hydrant, he flipped behind it and tore off the metal bowl-shaped top. Water poured upward, and he cupped his hands to direct the stream directly at Endeavor, where it struck Endeavor and turned to steam. Well done, boy, but it would take a lake to dose my fire. Endeavor gloated as the training area and he were engulfed in steam. Izuku grinned behind his alien armored mask as he slipped into the thick steam, and Endeavor frowned sympathetically. Ah, nice boy, what comes next? He asked, but before he could ask again, he felt a kick to his stomach from the heavy steam clouds surrounding them. He spun around and was struck again from the left, and he released a blast of fire in that direction, hitting him in the jaw with a fist. He blasted in multiple directions at once, screaming with pure rage, not wanting to test Midoriya but to make him pay for embarrassing him in this way. He growled as he raised his arms, focusing the fire into a destructive, nearly volcanic eruption wave that melted everything around him and destroyed several buildings. He was gasping for air and grinned. Izuku said, floating about 30 feet above the wave of pure volcanic fire, you missed me. He then swooped down and punched the pro-hero's stomach again, bending over from the blow and grunting. He staggered backwards and roared with rage, ready to attack the teen once more. Heroes win. Endeavor growled as a voice called out over the speakers, then stomped off in the direction of the exit. The next time will come. Boy, you can count on it. Endeavor let out a snarl and spat blood onto the molten concrete. Zero. Okay, I know we only went out twice, and well, I like you Kyoka a lot, Kyoka said, listening to Shoto almost ramble in an uncertain voice as he paced in front of her in the monitor room's corridor, unsure of what he wanted to ask her. He took a breath and began pacing back the other way, and Kyoka couldn't help but smile. He seemed so nervous for some reason, even though she could feel her own knees starting to shake. Then when I saw you in that gown, you looked so, well, beautiful and well, okay. Calm down, Shoto, and take a deep breath. Kyoka said, I really like you too, and Shoto gave her a big smile of joy. Sweat began to trickle down Shoto's back, so he took a deep breath and swallowed. Okay, I can do this. I hope I can do this. I want to do this. What should I do? Shoto stopped pacing when Kyoka asked. I'm not sure how to phrase this. Trying to express what he wanted but struggling to find the right words, Shoto said, I was going to ask Izuku how he asked. What do you ask me? Kyoka started to get a little frustrated, but she thought his nervousness was cute. He closed his eyes and took her hands in his before a wave of confusion nearly knocked him out. Shoto started to take deep breaths. Okay, I was hoping. Well, I would like to be your boyfriend. To be a couple like Momo and Izuku. Shoto let out a sigh of relief and smiled. Kyoka looked to her left and then right to make sure no one was around, then leaned in and gave him a quick kiss. His eyes widened as he felt her lips on his. She smiled again and led him back to the monitor room before someone noticed they weren't watching the challenge. She turned her head slightly as they went. As she opened the door and they slipped inside, Kyoka remarked, oh by the way that means yes. Momo left her house and took an Uber to Izuku's apartment building. It was past 9 o'clock by the time she got there, so she paid the driver and went inside. She knew that by this point, both Izuku and Inko Midoriya would be getting ready for bed, so she made a key and slipped into Izuku's room, where he stared at her in disbelief. I want to spend the night with you, she said, undressing and sliding into bed with him, wearing only a dark bra and matching underwear. She hadn't told him that she was going to do this, and that she didn't have to worry about her parents because they were on a weekend getaway and wouldn't return until Sunday night. Izuku looked nervously at his closed door and had to laugh. Not when there's a chance your mother might catch us. All I want is to stay with you overnight. He put his own arms around her and said the only thing he could think of. Hold you in my arms and have you hold me as well, she told him, putting her arms around him and resting her head comfortably on his chest. Momo grinned contentedly as Izuku whispered, I love you M. An hour before Inko Midoriya usually woke up, Momo and Izuku woke up. Okay, now you activate the Guyver and fly me down to the street, she said, putting on her pants, shirt, socks, and shoes again, and he dressed as well. Then I will come back up and knock on the door, she said, whispering back, I love you too Iz. Momo took a deep breath and hugged him even tighter. Izuku understood right away that Momo was coming over early because her parents were out of town and she was lonely, and his mother would have no trouble believing that. Following instructions, he landed in the alley and put Momo down. She said, see you in 5 minutes. He flew back upwards through his open window, and she walked casually towards the entrance of the building and headed to the apartment she had just left. Izuku knocked on the door, opened it, and she entered. Oh, good morning, Momo, Inko said, sipping coffee from her mug. So, when do your parents return from their vacation? With a slight worried grin, the elder Midoriya inquired. Sunday evening, Momo said, I'm sorry I came so early, but it gets kind of lonely at my house without my parents there. Inko snapped her fingers and shook her head. Hey, I have a thought. Would you mind remaining here until the afternoon of tomorrow? You don't mind that, do you, Izuku? Inko suggested, looking at her son, who was oddly quiet for some reason. You can sleep in Izuku's room and he can take the couch. Izuku shook his head when his mother asked. Izuku smiled slightly and said, not at all. His mother, Inko, was overjoyed that the two had reconciled. For one thing, her son was happy again, whereas previously he appeared so miserable that she was afraid he might take drastic measures. After saying, then it is settled, Inko proceeded to prepare breakfast. I'll arrange for an Uber to drive me home so I can get a few things and then return. Would you like to join me? Momo asked, and Izuku nodded. She smirked and winked at him, but she had a sneaking suspicion that he didn't understand. She would be less than subtle at her house. Monday morning. The action squad will rush you to the attack. Iwaza complained as he got on the bus and decided to enforce the rules immediately after noticing 3 adolescent couples sitting together. Attention class. Our journey to the Pussycat training grounds is underway. He looked directly at Momo Yaoyorozu and Izuku Midoriya, a long-term couple, and was silently happy that they were back together. It seemed to restore the balance in his class, which made it easier for him to teach the students. On the way and while there, you will adhere to the no fraternization policies that are established on school grounds. Hours later, Izuku activated the Guyver and flew in the direction of his falling girlfriend, catching her before she fell to the bottom covered in dirt like the others. They both landed and went to assist the others in climbing out of the dirt. The pink girl shook her head and clumps of dirt and sticks fell to the ground as Mina protested, "I hate getting dirty." Momo had to laugh when she said, "It ain't right that your boyfriend kept you from landing in the dirt with the rest of us." The entire class staggered into the pussycat camp after a longer than expected journey. Only Izuku appeared unaffected or exhausted, deactivating his armor because he was unprepared for Pixie Bob to swoon over him. Tenya, Katsuki, and Shoto glared at Pixie Bob, and Momo chose to speak up, saying, "Pardon me. Would you kindly take my boyfriend's hands?" Pixie took a step back and went to paw Shoto, and Kyoka cleared her throat as the blonde girl turned to face her and her hands were poised over Izuku's chest. "Could you tell me which of these 4 kittens is single?" "Okay, I guess that one will do," Pixie Bob asked in exasperation, and all 3 of the younger girls pointed at Tenya, who had gone very pale. They then moved to the younger man wearing glasses and started to fawn over him, which made him feel very uncomfortable. Momo, who was lounging on the girl's side of the hot springs, had the urge to break the rules and have Izuku meet her here later tonight. "Imagine me wanting to break the rules," she thought, laughing, and the others noticed. Fortunately, Kota knocked him off the wall, attracting the attention of the others. Despite this, Momo winced and said, "A whole week of not even holding his hand. This sucks, especially since we just got back together." The action squad's attack. Momo scowled when she was paired with Denki Kaminari, who was not as horrible as Mineta but close enough to make her feel a little uneasy about spending time alone with him in the woods. "Pardon me, Miss Mandalay," Momo said. However, Momo told the older woman, "I was hoping to be paired with Izuku Midoriya," and Mandalay grinned. Izuku flinched in disappointment as Mandalay said, "Well, for this exercise Mr. Midoriya will not be participating." He approached to inquire why, but the pro-hero was too quick. "I do not believe that Mr. Midoriya will benefit from conducting this exercise, and it does give whoever we pair him with an unfair advantage against Class 1B, she said to Momo, Izuku, and everyone else in the vicinity. "That makes sense, I suppose." Izuku grinned and added, "Especially since I can see in the dark and can actually fly. I could do it without activating the Guyver." Mandalay shook her head in response to his suggestion. "I considered asking you to do that. To be honest, Midoriya, I don't know why Mr. Iwaza brought you. In contrast to your classmates, you have so far shown that you truly do not require additional instruction," Mandalay told him, and Izuku could comprehend that the others required additional training to gain strength. As for the Guyver, he was as strong as he could get. "If you would like, Midoriya, maybe you could fly around until the exercise is over." Izuku grinned and said, "You might like it." He had been wanting to do that ever since they got there. High above, Izuku saw a dark scarred man laughing as he set fire to another tree. Gripping the man by the throat with one hand, he gazed down at the armored warrior and then attempted to light him as well, but this had no effect on the Guyver. Just as Izuku was about to ask the man what he was doing, Mandalay's telepathic voice came to him, informing him that the camp and everyone inside were being attacked by villains. "All right, who are you?" Izuku inquired, and the man grinned. "Do you not want to know?" "All right, you don't have to threaten to cut me," Dabi said sarcastically before pausing when a long blade emerged from Izuku Midoriya's left forearm. The villain grinned broadly and said, "I bet some of your friends are meeting some of my team this time. We are the Vanguard Action Squad and I am Dabi." Dabi started to laugh, but Izuku growled and drew him closer to the strange armor eyes. "I wonder if any of your friends will survive that encounter. If my Momo Yaoyorozu is hurt or killed by any of your friends." Izuku whispered menacingly, "I will hunt you all down and, well, death will seem like a pleasurable release to what I will do to you." Dabi stared at the armored teenager in shock and fear, which he rarely felt, and he immediately called the others when Izuku dropped him to the ground and took off. "Pay attention. Stay away from Momo Yaoyorozu." Before they could ask, Dabi said, "Believe me in this." He looked up, shook his head, and shut off the channel. "There's no way in hell that I'm going to fight a guy who defeated Stain. She was number 5 of the chick pictures you all saw," he muttered, "or have him hunt me down. I don't care what Tamura Shigaraki says, I am not that suicidal." He then made sure Nomu understood that he should not hurt or pursue any females at all, as he seriously doubted that the big brute even knew which one was male or female. Izuku sped through the air to where his classmates were supposed to be. He wanted to make sure Momo was okay before worrying about the others, but that wasn't going to happen right now. Melissa was fighting a huge brute high on a cliff, and while she was doing okay, she was struggling to protect Mandalay's cousin Kota from the villain while also trying to overpower him. She needed her partner's assistance, so he sped as fast as he could, which he discovered he could fly. He slammed both fists into the brute's chest, pushing Muscular back against the stone and rock cliff face. Then he joined Melissa. "About time you got here," Melissa said with a small relief. "I apologize. Is that a muscle?" Izuku inquired, and Kota responded before Melissa could. Izuku saw tears streaming down Kota's face as he pulled himself away from the rocks, and Muscular started to laugh. "Yes, and he is the one that killed my parents," the young boy said sadly and angrily. "All right, I assumed this would be dull. Even though we've had a lot of fun together," Muscular said, "I wanted to see how tough the Guyver is compared to me." He grinned broadly as he started to gain muscle from his quirk. Izuku nodded as Melissa stated, "We nail this guy together, Izuku." She reminded him that they were training to be partners and teammates. "You aim high, I go low. On 3. Izuku rushed forward, and as Muscular lunged towards him, Melissa went forward and punched the brute hard in the stomach, accessing 50% of One for All. Knowing that it would hurt even with the braces on her arms, Kota watched intently from a distance as Izuku Midoriya in the Guyver armor and the blonde girl Melissa Shields battled the person who killed his mother and father. They were in perfect coordination and cooperation, and when one struck, Muscular would move and strike. This astounded Kota, who watched with great interest, hoping that they actually hurt the killer. While Melissa stepped back and her partner grabbed Muscular's right forearm and threw him hard against the rock wall, Melissa told Izuku, "This is getting us nowhere. We need to end this and help the others." The brute was then forced deeper into the stone as she charged forward and delivered a right punch to his face. She let out a frustrated sigh as she leapt back. Pulling himself out of the rocks again, Muscular was laughing. Melissa grimaced when Izuku said, "I am open to suggestions." Melissa pointed to Izuku's forearms and said, "I think we need to go for a more aggressive approach." Izuku let out an exhausting hiss from his armored face. 2 nearly unbreakable blades protruded. Melissa focused on One for All 100% of the time. This had to be over. In other places, together with Yosetsu Awase, Momo fled from the monstrous Nomu, her head spinning from the bump. Momo soon discovered that although it was pursuing them relentlessly, it was not genuinely attempting to catch up to them. Simply keep them moving. Although she thought that was strange, she dared not test that theory because she was unable to think clearly. Yosetsu Awase pulled her along and said, "Come on. We have to keep moving or that thing is going to get us." Since he was there with what might have been the most attractive girl in school and was making a concerted effort to win her over, he could not help but enjoy the situation. Yes, he was well aware of her relationship with Izuku Midoriya. However, he thought she could outperform some quirkless fool, just like the majority of the boys at UA. Momo halted behind a tree after a minute. She felt lightheaded from shaking her head. Feeling like she was going to throw up, Momo muttered, "No. It is not trying to actually get to us." She couldn't help but hope that Izuku was alright and wasn't doing something incredibly foolish once she was able to think clearly. The Nomu turned on their backs. She shut her eyes and focused as hard as she could, taking away from her a tracking device, then gave Yosetsu the item. Yosetsu followed Momo's instructions as he slumped against the tree and said, "Fuse this onto the Nomu with your quirk." Getting recorded. Despite the brutal and difficult battle with Muscular, Izuku and Melissa ultimately prevailed. Melissa, holding her broken left arm in her right hand, said feebly, "I will take Kota to the camp." She had used all of her strength, and she broke her arm just above the wrist when her left fist struck Muscular's chin. Izuku withdrew his blades and started to float above the earth. Without telling Melissa that he was also going to go check on Momo's safety and make sure his threat to the scarred villain was being taken seriously, Izuku said, "Good idea. I am going to go tell Mandalay he is safe and help subdue the other villains." As he flew over the trees, he saw that the gas seemed to be starting to fade. Then he heard a blast, and he realized it was coming from Kachan. He noticed 4 of his classmates were present as he veered in the direction of the sound. Fumikare Tokiyami, Mezzo Shoju, Shoto Todoroki, and of course Kachan. A dark, strange man was leaning against a tree nearby. With a slight sneer, Katsuki Bakugo remarked, "About time you showed up, Deku." Suddenly, another mana who was oddly sporting a top hat and a kapea leapt out of the shadows. "I'm contacting Fumikare and Katsuki." Izuku shoved both away as he rushed forward, and then everything went dark for him, unsure of what transpired. The attacker chuckled and leapt back into the shadowy woods as Katsuki spun in the direction of the stranger and let out a blast. Katsuki commanded, "After him. He has Deku," and the three others trailed behind him as they went after the villain. Under his mask, Dr. Compress grinned as he ducked away from the four teenagers. He didn't really intend to capture the Guyver, but it would be suicide to try again. Those UA students would be alert now. He produced the other he had captured by reaching into his pocket. She made the error of being in the right place at the right time, which is why he was able to catch another. He ran to join the others, his cape flapping behind him. Together with the two that Dr. Compress had obtained, those who could then flee. 0. Back at the camp, her minor head wound was covered with a bandage. Momo wanted to scream. She recently found out that her boyfriend Izuku had been taken by the villains, and to make matters worse, Mina Ishido had also been taken prisoner. She felt a little lightheaded and had to sit down before she could go and ask Mr. Iwaza or the newly arrived responding heroes for answers. As soon as she sat, she passed out, waking up on a hospital bed in a white room. Simultaneously, Izuku opened his eyes and was relieved to still be wearing the Guyver armor. However, he also saw that he had heavy chains around his ankles and wrists that held his arms and legs. They were positioned on his wrists so that he couldn't use his blades to cut them. Izuku heard Mina ask, "Are you awake?" from the other side of the room, right in front of him. Izuku was going to pull when Mina screamed, "Yes. Hold on a second, I bet I can break these chains easily." Mina shouted, "No, stop." And Izuku did. She gave him a sharp exhale as she said, "They tied your chains to me. If you continued tugging, you would rip my arms off." Izuku could tell she was afraid because she bit her lower lip and said, "They delightfully informed me the second I woke up a minute or so ago." He turned his head and shot a laser, which hardly left any scars on the metal. Izuku asked, "What is wrong?" And Mina started taking shallow, slow breaths. "Oh, nothing other than that they told me that they plan on gang raping me as soon as they have a chance." Mina spoke barely audibly. Additionally, she had chains fastened to her ankles and wrists. She wouldn't even be able to defend herself if and when they followed their instructions. "Not going to happen. As soon as one of them come in here I will fire a laser into his ass. That will discourage them," Izuku said as Mina growled. Mina shook her head in response to his question, "Do you think you could throw some acid on these chains?" Izuku started thinking about how they might get out when Mina said, "Won't work. They acid-proofed them." These assholes thought of everything. He could get them both out of here before they tried to capture them again if he could break free. But he couldn't just pull and break the chains because of the way they were rigged. Mina would be torn apart by it. He looked at his armored wrists and saw that the chains were clamped shut around them. When he realized he couldn't even twist them, a thought struck him. The Guyver armor measured roughly 1/8 inch around him, but it was more like 3/16 inch around his wrists. If he turned back to himself, it wouldn't be enough for him to just remove his hands from the chains. Maybe, though, it was sufficient for something else. Mina did as Izuku instructed. "Okay, I think I have an idea. First, pull the chains on your right." The chains that were fastened to the ceiling shifted in her direction. Good, they made a critical mistake since they did not put in anything to inhibit you pulling the chains towards you. Now comes the part that is really going to hurt. He saw her gasp. He told her, "No, not you, me." After giving it some thought, the Guyver armor turned off and returned to the back of his neck. She looked at him in disbelief and said, "Okay, now I suspect that we only have a few minutes. I want your help to dislocate my left shoulder." Mina let out a breath and started pulling with her left hand as he firmly said, "Come on, pull, keep pulling until." Now pull." Izuku simultaneously leaned down and forward. He continued pushing as it started to hurt, and she pulled. He felt his left shoulder dislocate and grunted in pain, saying, almost there." Ah, he thought he was going to faint from the severe pain. His face went white, and it required all of his focus to look up and down at his strangely hanging left arm. Mina looked at him in disbelief and asked, "Are you all right?" Izuku gave a feeble nod. Izuku was taking deep, shallow breaths and almost whispering, "Yes and no. Keep talking to me so I do not pass out." Mina started talking and repeatedly asked him if he was okay. He concentrated on her, and the armor slapped around him as he let out a shuddering breath. He grinned as he looked up at his shackled left arm. He exclaimed with relief, it worked. Now that he had his left forearm at an angle, he could draw the blade and it would cut through the chains that bound his right wrist. The blade slid out and effortlessly cut the chains with a snap. Reaching up, he cut the chains on his left arm, freeing his right arm. Then slit the ones that were securing his ankles. He sliced Mina loose, his left arm sagging at his side. Laying face up on the floor, I deactivated the armor once more. Mina took hold of his left wrist and pressed her right foot against his dislocated shoulder, saying, "Last step. I need you to pop my shoulder back in." Izuku screamed as his shoulder snapped back into position with a violent jerk upward. 0. Those in the League of Villains who were watching gaped at what they had just witnessed. Dabi grinned broadly and remarked, "Well shit. I did not think he would have the balls to do something so desperate." Tamura Shigaraki scowled at the tiny screen as Spinner remarked, "Stain the hero killer said that he was worthy. So he must be." Tamura Shigaraki yelled, "What the fuck are all of you still doing here? Go get him." And everyone in the room gave a little laugh. As she twirled a small knife in her fingers, Himiko Toga said, amusingly, "Yeah right. You go get him if you want. Me personally, I have no plans on facing someone that held his own against Stain and won." Tamura Shigaraki glanced at each of those present. "Fucking pussies." Tamura Shigaraki moaned, then winced as he looked at his severed left wrist. He had lost his hand because he had attacked the Guyver. He wasn't going to lose his other one. His ultimate plan to kill All Might would have been foiled if he did. He sat down and noticed a couple of people who were meant to be a part of the Vanguard Action Squad, the best and most dangerous in the League of Villains. His quirk came from his hands, well, his right hand. "If he lost it," he said, "fine, let them leave, that just proves that all of you are worthless. Scared of some teenager and some pink slut. We will wait until they are outside then attack them. In that room he has the advantage, outside will give us more room to maneuver and he will be forced to protect the pink girl." Dabi said with a nod. However, Tamura had a suspicion that people here, even outside, were not particularly excited about facing the alien armored monster. Martin Taranka had been trudging through the thick jungle for the last 6 days. Along with him were 4 armed mercenaries, 7 locals who carried the supplies, and a native guide Taranka only knew as Diego. Taranka was losing nearly all of the money he had obtained from the League of Villains as a result of this incursion into the Amazon, but he hoped it would be worthwhile. After he borrowed the images, he noticed something very significant. A Mayan pyramid had been found. A few of the external symbols were the same as those found on the South Pole Glacier. He therefore hoped that there would be more powerful Guyver units or possibly something more potent inside. Taranka grinned as Diego remarked, "Senor, we are almost at the pyramid." Taranka said impatiently, "Well, it is about time." He hoped this would not be another catastrophe like the time he hired a hacker to break into Cynthia Clemens' computer. Regarding the Guyver unit, he had hoped the scientist had learned something important. He estimated that it would take at least 20 years before it was even possible to recreate something similar, but that was all she had. On a dead end, he had squandered a good $100,000. The pyramid was now the center of all his hopes. An hour later, Taranka arrived at the pyramid's northern side and started looking around. From what he could see, there was no way inside, and there were no obvious entrances. The others made camp while he studied the great stones, examining the various cryptographic symbols. The mercenaries, the guide, and the porters had only been able to pay him for 2 weeks of service. They would then all want more money, but he didn't have any. Thus, Taranka's enemy was time. He started looking for some hidden entrance where the symbols resembled those from the South Pole. There was none, of course. There was only one thing he could do. He took one stick of dynamite from his bag and pushed it between 2 of the large stone squares. He lit the fuse with a flick of his lighter before sprinting around the pyramid's corner. The dynamite exploded a minute later, and he came back. He had one of his mercenaries shout, "What the fuck are you doing, Taranka?" The others had stayed in camp, so Taranka turned to face the man who was approaching, allowing their leader to discover the reason behind Taranka's explosives use. Concerned that any of the natives might flee to the closest village and cause trouble, Taranka gave the order, saying, "I need to get in there and I do not have time searching for some type of entrance. So I made my own. Now get back to Camp Hines, make sure none of those natives have left." He pulled out a flashlight, smiled, and stepped into the pyramid. He easily escaped the first set of traps 10 meters inside. "Idiots," he muttered as he crossed the pressure stone that caused the walls to spew poisonous darts. Taranka shook his head and whispered, "Why have traps if you mark them on the walls indicating their whereabouts?" He reached a door farther inside, and as he pushed it open, he heard air whooshing in. He gasped as he peered inside. Somehow, the room was lit, and from what he could see, it was ideal for a laboratory of some kind. Which astonished him greatly because, as far as he could tell, it was spotless. Nothing, not even dust. Then he recalled the air coming in, and he realized that the room had been sealed to keep the contents safe. The anticipation made his mouth water. This kind of technology had to be alien because it was far beyond the capabilities of the ancient Mayans. He cursed and looked around the room. In a desperate growl, he said, "No. There has to be Guyver units here." However, there were only what seemed to be cabinets of some kind that were too tiny to hold units that weren't activated. He grimaced and opened the stone cabinets. Vials of some kind of fluid were lying on the shelves. There were precisely 10, and each one had an odd code. He picked one up, focused on the symbols, and then wanted to toss it on the ground. As he looked over the vials again, he told himself, "Calm down, Martin. The aliens left these here in perfect condition for a reason." He took out his laptop and opened the linguist's translation program. He was able to decipher it, but it was not a full translation. It was a mutated combination of some kind of human hybrid beast, according to each symbol. He turned the vials in his hand and saw that one end had an injector that resembled a needle. That informed him that in order to observe its effects, it would be necessary to inject it into a human. He was fortunate to have a number of candidates nearby for him to test out. He scanned some of the text on the wall with his laptop so that it could be translated later. He packed the vials into his bag and headed back to camp. Around the globe, rather than leaving the house, which would be very clear. Instead, Izuku went to the far wall and made 3 cuts through the concrete with his right blade. He moved back and kicked the wall where he had just cut with a left spin kick. When his foot struck that section, it exploded, providing him and Mina Ishido with a means of escape. Izuku picked Mina up and flew out the window, landing among the police after spotting them. Inside, in the meantime, the heroes had faced the villains. Mina released the tension with a sigh of relief. When she was repeatedly told by that blonde psychopath that the men would rape her. It was impossible for Mina not to believe the girl, primarily because the girl was so convincing. She turned to thank Izuku, but she gasped as she saw him vanish as he was swallowed by some kind of shadow. Izuku was in a demolished lot one moment and with the police outside the League of Villains headquarters the next. Surrounded by the villains he had hoped to avoid seeing so quickly. He was getting frustrated with the whole thing. Dabi commanded, "Get him. We have him surrounded and we outnumber him," and the others began to move in his direction. Tamura Shigaraki, however, kept a safe distance away. Like Stain the hero killer, Izuku ducked a sword cut from the green lizard-like man who appeared to be wearing a mask. Then he seized the man and slammed him against the one who had first taken him prisoner. Izuku turned his head slightly and saw a blonde girl hysterically smiling as she stabbed him with her short knife. He heard but did not feel a dagger slice across his back. It cracked. Izuku said, "Nice try," and then gently pushed the girl away. Even though he knew he ought to have pushed her more, he was unable to bring himself to do her harm. The scarred man stepped around the girl and attempted to approach, but he retreated when Izuku swung his blades and steam escaped from the area that would have been his mouth. Utterly frightening. Tamura scowled and started frantically scratching at his neck with his right hand. Tamura grinned, then scowled in alarm as he looked over and saw All for One fighting All Might. "Everyone stop. He is only delaying us. Keeping us occupied until a hero arrives. We must do what the master brought us here to do. Escape." He was aware that his master was weak and that a protracted battle could only end in one way. They would defeat his master. He complained as he turned to face his closest comrade. Still, Kurogiri could not free them. He finally got the others to follow his instructions, saying, "Separate and relocate. This will not be the end of the League of Villains." 0. As Izuku battled the villains, 4 of his friends, classmates, and the girl he loved looked on from above the area. Momo begged as she took a step toward the 30 or 40-foot drop-off, "We need to help him." Her arm was restrained by Katsuki Bakugo. "No, Deku could fly off any time he wants. I think he is keeping those fuckers occupied until a pro-hero arrives and from letting those assholes gang up on All Might." Katsuki responded with disdain. Eijiro Kirishima smiled slightly and said, "Hey, that makes sense. Who knew you would be the one not to want to jump down there and join in?" Katsuki turned to face him and gave him a fierce glare. Katsuki grimaced and said, "Shut up, asshole. Of course I want to go down there. Those assholes were at the camp trying to get me, not Deku. He was determined to face them. He had been attacked, and he would have been taken prisoner if Izuku Midoriya hadn't shoved him at the last second. He desired retribution. Momo felt compelled to order the class president to go make a flying leap after Tenya Iida said, "Besides, if we go down there, we would be breaking the law. We are not licensed heroes." Her goal was to support her boyfriend. Fortunately, the villains all took off in different directions at that precise moment, and Momo exhaled in relief. Momo asked impatiently, "Can we go down there now?" And Izuku flew up to join them before they could respond. After deactivating the Guyver, Momo leapt onto Izuku and nearly knocked him over with her arms and legs. She didn't care if her dress showed her underwear. She only wished to keep her Izuku close at hand. With tears running down her cheeks, she sobbed in his right ear, "Never do that again." Izuku clung to Momo and whispered, "I'll try," kissing her while she returned the kiss. The others were considerate enough to turn around and offer them a small amount of privacy. At the same time, All Might gave it their all against All for One. Izuku put Momo down and grinned despite the pain in his left shoulder. Then he suddenly screamed and put his hands on his head. "Izuku!" Momo cried out in alarm as well, seeing her boyfriend clutch his head and scream in agony. Izuku's mind flashed with images so quickly and painfully that he was unable to hear either Momo or his own cries. The images fell to his knees and continued for what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only a few seconds. When Momo took his hands and made another attempt to get his attention, he gasped for air and failed to notice. He closed his eyes as a severe headache pounded in his head, and he eventually fainted. The zoanoids in the Amazon jungle. Tanka spent an hour translating a portion of the text. However, he quickly realized that the majority of it was a warning. The aliens had erred by giving their slaves the ability to work and serve them more effectively. As a result, they developed a mutagen that changed a human into a creature they dubbed a zoanoid. Ultimately, the aliens had no choice but to eradicate the mutated humans and then depart from Earth. Tanka therefore made the decision that it was time to see if the contents of these vials were what he hoped they were. Giving one of the vials covertly to the porters who were the weakest. Tanka bided her time until something happened. In fact, he thought the smallest porter might just die after falling. Dealing with something made by an alien race that had produced the Guyver unit presented a lot of unknowns. He learned that every vial contained some kind of mutagen that would transform a human into a worker or warrior based on the translation of the text on the walls. The contents of each vial were coded. He therefore gave Pablo an injection of the weakest worker formula to keep things somewhat safe. Since nothing appeared to happen, he was tempted to inject the smaller man once more after an hour. He reached into his bag and took out the same vial. At that moment, a wonderful thing occurred. Being a well-known bully, Manuel chose to push Pablo again, and the smaller man collapsed to the ground in agony. Tanka saw the man's eyes as he glared up at Manuel. Pablo's eyes had turned completely black instead of brown and white. Pablo let out a ticking roar, and his skin appeared to burst off him, exposing a humanoid-like insect. The larger man flew backwards, slamming into a tree, as it leapt upwards and slapped Manuel with one of its sinewy arms. Even from 20 feet away, Tanka could hear Manuel's bones breaking. Pablo's mandibles clicked together as he tickled roar once more. "Pablo!" exclaimed one of the others, and Pablo, the insect, turned to face the other. Pablo's ticking voice said, "Yes." The other person kept staring at the insect that had once been his brother. Pablo laughed and his mandibles kept clicking together when Ramirez asked, "When did your quirk change or something?" Then he turned to face himself and chuckled once more. Ramirez went to see how Manuel was doing. He shook his head and touched the man's jugular. "He is dead, Pablo. He deserved it. He tormented us all for so long because his quirk made him stronger. Well, I am now stronger than he ever could hope to be. I do not know what happened and why I changed into this. But whatever this is, I like it. I feel so powerful," Pablo said with a ticking voice, and Tanka laughed likewise. "I'm starting to wonder what a person would receive from the other vials that were coded warriors." He removed the one that said it was the strongest and gave himself an injection. Tanka muttered, "The rebirth of the zoanoids." Then, as he felt the power coursing through him, he laughed, transforming him into the thing that would give him the ability to take control of Momo Yoayorozu and destroy the Guyver. The emergency department. Izuku groaned as he woke up and attempted to sit up, but someone quickly forced him to lie back down. With concern, Momo leaned closer to see her in the room's dim light and said, "Stay there." Izuku blinked as she reached over and turned on a tiny light. Then she became clear. He touched his head with his upper hand. Momo bit her lower lip as Izuku mumbled, "Wow. I have such a headache." He asked, "What happened?" And Momo scowled. Momo, who was now quite worried, told him, "You tell me. 1 second you were fine and the next you screamed, clutched your head, and then passed out." When the doctor arrived and told them that Izuku Midoriya was healthy, there was nothing wrong. Momo let out a sigh of relief and then let Izuku sit up. After suggesting that Izuku stay overnight for observation, the doctor departed. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to recall, and then swallowed when she asked, "So do you remember anything?" "Whatever it was, I think it has to do with the Guyver. What I can remember well, it seemed to bombard me with a cascade of images. Izuku was shaking. He focused and recalled a few of them. Were extremely violent and bloody. Destruction on a global scale type of thing. They were terrible." Momo shook her head and said, "I think it might be kind of like a history, a very intensive destructive history." She didn't want him to reflect on it any longer. Concerned about a potential relapse. Momo said, "Enough for now. Maybe it might be best you talk to someone that might be able to help you." Cynthia Clemens came to mind right away. Izuku gave a headshake. Izuku looked out the window toward the southwest and said, "No, I think I need to figure this out myself for now. I had the impression that something horrible was taking place in that direction." He started piecing together the images as more came into focus. Izuku smiled and took her hand in his. Momo said firmly, "Well, you are not getting rid of me. I am staying, and if I can help you." His fingers entwined with hers. Izuku remarked, "Wouldn't even think about not having you here, M." Momo leaned in and gave him a quick kiss. After that, he got up and went to lock the door. A second later, she came back and lay down beside him. She put her arms around him and rested her head on his right shoulder. She wanted to have sex, but there was too much chance that a nurse or doctor would come in to see how he was doing. So until she could get him alone, she would have to settle for just sleeping with him. After Izuku switched off the light, they both fell asleep a few minutes later. The images finally made sense in his dreams. The alien city of Alantisa equals Auk was rife with death and destruction. Thousands of augmented humanoids fell. They were ruthlessly chopped down, some ripped to pieces. However, the majority were vaporized when the defenders struck them with their chest-mounted cannons. More slaves rebelled against their masters, and thousands of slaves perished. Therefore, it was determined that the city would have to be totally destroyed in order to put an end to the rebellion. Submerging it in the sea, the masters destroyed the barrier preventing the city from sinking into the surrounding seas in order to escape to their ships. As those who worked for the masters perished in excruciating pain, absolute death reigned. Following the eradication of the zoanoids, the masters made the decision to lock up the formulas in one of their research temples. Izuku woke up, blinking, and let out a loud gasp. Now that he completely understood the pictures he saw, he whispered, "Oh my God." He stood motionless, not wanting to wake Momo, and started to question why the Guyver had chosen to now reveal what it did to him. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the city that had been destroyed was the legendary sunken city of Atlantis, and he managed to control his breathing to find one positive aspect of what he had just witnessed. However, he didn't think anyone would accept that it was constructed and inhabited by extraterrestrial beings. The reference to something known as the zoanoids was what truly alarmed him. Because he felt worried just thinking about them for some reason. When he told Momo about his dream in the morning, she became worried as well. The Zoanoids' ascent on Grand Cayman Island. Tanka had little trouble persuading the mercenaries and others to join him in becoming augmented humans. Each seized the opportunity to gain more power after witnessing what Pablo and Tanka could accomplish in their new forms. However, a few of them did not particularly enjoy the thought of becoming so dreadfully ugly after they changed. For Tanka, the idea of having a big mouth full of sharp teeth and long black snot was not a particularly pleasant experience. He seriously questioned whether Momo Yaoyorozu would find him attractive in this shape. However, he was not particularly concerned about that, because it was as simple to change back as it was to become the Zoanoid. He was a little impatient to get back and claim her as his own. He was going to have her, even if it meant pushing himself on her. He could practically picture his hands caressing her beautiful body and then feeling her when he had her, exacerbated his impatience. But before Tanka could eliminate the only thing standing between him and Momo Yaoyorozu, he would have to make Tamura Shigaraki and the pitiful League of Villains pay. Guyver. As Tanka couldn't help but be impressed, Hines reported, "Sir, we are all set and ready." Hines grinned widely when Tanka said, "Good. Now are you sure that this bank has that much money in its vault?" Hines told him, and Tanka grinned back, "Yes. Me and the others wanted to rob this bank for years. But it has about 12 guards and all of them have quirks that make them stronger." Tanka gave the order, and the two entered the large cement steel building together. "Then let us go make a nice withdrawal and then be on our way." The guards were easily overpowered by the other 3 members of their group inside. The manager gave the 2 men a victorious smile after slamming the vault door shut. However, as 3 monsters wiped out his guards, the manager was trembling with terror as well. Tanka and Hines both transformed into their own hybrid forms and approached the steel vault door. With a grunt, each seized hold of the door and tore it from its strengthened bolts, then flung it at the bank manager, nearly flattening him. Inside the vault, Tanka snarled contentedly. Hines snarled and started lifting bags of US dollars, saying, "Told you, boss." The creature with short tusks and a small trunk that resembled an elephant grated, "The cartels used this bank to launder their money." One of the bags was picked up by Tanka. With a growl, Tanka tossed another bag to one of the others who caught it, saying, "Excellent. With this type of money we can easily fund ourselves for a long time." The others started to take the bags after he gave the order, "Take it all." Before the local police could even react, the 5 of them departed. The entire incident was captured by the bank surveillance cameras, and it was featured on international news within a day. Finding. At home, Izuku sat with Momo snuggled up beside him in his and his mother's apartment. When he came to the recording of the bank robbery, he stopped flipping through the channels. Momo was immediately intrigued. "Shit," she exclaimed, gesturing toward the screen. She said, "That is Martin Tanka." Izuku gave her a nod, thinking back to his brief meeting with the demented professor. That in order to figure out what made the Guyver function, the insane fool wanted to dissect him. Both of them later found out from the police that Tanka was obsessed with Momo Yaoyorozu, according to a private investigator. Tanka's desire for explicit pictures of her and the pious suspicion that the man had evil plans for the young girl. They watched the recording, and when the 2 men appeared to transform into monstrous monsters in front of the camera, Izuku also gasped. Izuku recognized the creatures at once. "Momo. Those are what the Guyver showed me. Those are the zoanoids, the mutated human creatures that the aliens created." Izuku looked worried. Momo looked at Izuku and let out a sharp exhale. "I believe that is why the Guyver showed me those images. It detected them and it wanted me to know." Izuku nodded when Momo said, "I think it might be a good idea to tell someone about them." Izuku asked, "Who would you recommend? I mean, who would I tell that won't think I am crazy?" Momo grinned. Momo uttered the words, "Mr. Iwaza. After all, he is our homeroom teacher. If not him, then perhaps Miss Kayama. She told me and the other girls to come see her if we ever have any problems or questions." Well, this is definitely a problem. However, Miss Kayama was not referring to this kind of issue. She was referring to any issues they might have had with boys or something similar. Not issues that included monsters made by aliens. Momo suspected that Izuku was correct when he said, "Maybe I should talk to them both and just about anyone else. Because I have a feeling that Tanka is coming here." She was very anxious and worried about that. As soon as Izuku and Momo left the hospital, they came across a news crew. Izuku made a choice while he was sleeping. He had had enough of the League of Villains pursuing his classmates and friends. As soon as the news reporter started questioning them, Izuku snatched up the reporter's microphone. He said, "I want to say something." Momo gave him a perplexed look. Izuku then returned her microphone to the reporter and left with Momo. "This is to Tamura Shigaraki and the rest of the League of Villains. This is twice you came after my friends and classmates. Come again and I will come after you. I will hunt you all down and, well, you will hope that I show mercy. Which I will not." "Izzy," Momo said worriedly, "I do not think that was a good idea. You might get in trouble for saying that." But she could comprehend. After admitting, Izuku called Mr. Iwaza, All Might, and Miss Kayama, also known as Midnight, on his cell phone. "I know but I am tired of those assholes coming after us. Hurting our friends and maybe having that whatever it was, I feel a little hostile. I do not know. Maybe you are right, it was not a good idea. They arrived at the UA campus in less than an hour after requesting a meeting with the pro-heroes teachers. Izuku told the three what he saw and understood after he showed them the YouTube video. Despite their apparent skepticism, the heroes believed what Izuku had to say, pledging to forward it. Iwaza then pressed play on the recorder and switched on the TV. Izuku was there, stating his position. I do not approve of that. It was stupid and foolish. It also is not how a student of UA, a potential hero, is supposed to act. You do not threaten to hunt down others and, well, you did not say what you would do. But I assume you intend them bodily harm. Iwaza was forced to correct Izuku Midoriya. At the same time, though, he realized. The League of Villains has now attacked Class IA twice, and this time, a number of students and Izuku's friends were hurt. We will release a statement that you were a little unnerved from being captured by the League of Villains and that you spoke while not fully recovered from your ordeal. Nimari replied with a scowl. Do not ever say something like that to the reporters again. Principal Nezu is right now trying to convince the government that you were not rational when you made that statement to the press. She said, and Izuku nodded. Izuku stood and looked at his teachers, who shook their heads. The thing is, ma'am, I was serious, and if they do come after us again. I am sorry, but I am going after them. It's not that I blame him. They were also compelled to find Tamura Shigaraki and the League of Villains. Although Momo Yaoyorozu remained silent, she gave Izuku her full support. Momo still clung to Izuku in a possessive manner after leaving, but she was also sick of criminals and villains pursuing people in Class IA. Izuku pointed to the approaching Lincoln luxury car and said, here comes your car. Momo shook her head when he told her, I need to get going if I am going to catch the train. Momo held his hand tightly as they got into the car and said, nope, you are coming home with me. My dad and mom have already arranged it. Your mom is already there. So get into the car. Izuku saw that two other people were seated in the front seat, and he could tell that they were both armed. She cuddled up to him and said, Dad increased security until we get moved onto the campus because he thinks the League might come after us again. The armed men in the front seat were completely ignored. They were made aware of the plan earlier that day when it was declared that, in order to protect the safety of the students, all UA students would be moving into dorms. Momo grinned at Izuku when he said, that is at least a week or two away. Momo firmly said, so you will be staying at my house until then. She then leaned in closer, turning to make sure no one in the front seat was watching. She extended her arm to draw Izuku nearer and kissed him. As they kissed, she injected her tongue. She kissed her way up his chin to his right ear, parting slightly. She whispered, tonight, make sure you leave your door unlocked. He swallowed clearly. Then shuddered when she kissed and licked his earlobe. Going back to kiss his lips again, she resumed sitting beside him and holding his hand when they arrived at her street. All Might, now in his weaker form as Toshinori Yagi, went to the high-security prison facility that housed All for One while Iwaza and Takiyama handled the information and contacted the media to release the statement. Following a conversation with the evil psychopath, even the power-mad maniac could make mistakes, All Might discovered. Izuku Midoriya, who was wearing the Guyver armor at the time, had been transported by All for One in a desperate attempt. For one thing, he hoped that having the armor would boost his power to the point where he wouldn't require the life support systems that kept him alive. The Guyver was alien technology, not a quirk that could be stolen or, as Iwaza discovered, blocked, so it was a classic mistake on his part. Soon after, All Might departed, intending to bring his worries about the South American incident to the Hero administration. It was not as simple as Tanka had hoped to find the League of Villains. He and his companions essentially tore apart the 7 or 8 League members after they found a small splinter cell. Tanka felt better, one of those there he had let live. He laughed as he stood over the frightened woman. Tanka growled and said, I am allowing you to live. He leaned closer to the young woman and gave her a menacing growl. Tell Tamura Shigaraki that I, Martin Tanka, had done this and that I and my companions are coming for him. He waved his clawed hand, and the woman got up and fled the room. Remember to tell him what you saw here. Oh, and if he asked, these are not quirks and we are the zoanoids. Now go. Hines snarled and threw one of his victim's arms over his shoulder, saying, this was fun. Tanka was tempted by the other's question, now that we had some fun here. Do you want us to go and get that girl you want? His sexual lust for Momo Yaoyorozu had been greatly heightened by the blood lust. He shook his head like a monster. No, not yet. We must find a place to be and then possibly recruit others. In time the heroes will try to stop us. But with the power we possess I doubt that any of them would be a match to us. Not even the great and powerful All Might. Tanka was slightly embarrassed. Since the number one hero had retired and was only a shadow of his former self, they didn't really need to worry about All Might. Tanka understood why the other wanted to go, and Hines suggested, "Are you sure, boss? Me and Torso could find her and bring her to you." In order to find out if one alien creation could defeat another, Hines intended to face Izuku Midoriya. Tanka had filled them in on the Guyver's history during the journey from South America. How it covered Izuku Midoriya in a kind of bio-enhanced armor that appeared to be impervious and unbreakable up until that point. Tanka shook his head once more and gradually changed back to his human form. Hines and the others turned back into humans when Tanka retorted, "In time, Hines. When I have the time to fully enjoy her, then I might take you up on your suggestion and have you bring her to me. We do not have time for me to indulge in her yet." Pablo Martinez, make sure to download this little diversion on YouTube and address it to Tamura Shigaraki. I want him to know and see what is going to happen to him. He instructed and the two brothers chuckled. With assurance, Pablo held up the computer camera and connected it to a laptop. The carnage was released a minute later. With the mangled bodies scattered everywhere, the small group dressed and left, planning their next meeting with the League of Villains and making their way to their lair. Zero. With his right hand scratching frantically at his neck, Tamura Shigaraki rewatched the video. Sitting off to one side, the lone survivor avoided looking at the computer screen. She didn't need to see it again to remember it because she had already survived it. The ability to project spikes from her fingernails was her quirk. They tore her companions apart, barely fazed that she had shot the intruders with those spikes. As she heard the others' screams coming through the laptop speakers, she covered her ears with her hands. From behind a counter, Kurogiri remarked, "It would seem to Mura that Martin Tanka was able to locate something other than another Guyver unit." In his hand, the shadowy man held a tall glass. Tamura growled, scratching his neck even more. He dares attack us. He dares to threaten me," he said. "Contact the Dabi. Tell him to find Tanka and his cronies. Tell him I want them dead. No, not Tanka. I want that piece of shit brought to me so I can kill him myself." The order came from the League's leader. Then, with a sharp exhale, he shut off his laptop. This was not what he needed now. Some child essentially wiped the floor with the best the League had, and to make things worse, his master was in prison. That same child appeared to frighten the majority of the vaulted Vanguard action squad. After all, that thing did cut off Tamuro's left hand, so he could somewhat relate. Dabi and the others are out recruiting for some replacements to their team. With Muscular and Mustard in prison, their numbers are a bit reduced for the moment, Kurogiri stated, and Tamura sighed. Tamura snarled, and the woman who went by Nails said, "I am sure they are capable enough to deal with whatever they are." Zoanoids was it. Now do as I have said. Nails tried not to recall seeing one of the tusk-wielding creatures tear off Hunji's arms, legs, and head. "I do not know, sir. Those things, those creatures, those zoanoids, tore my companions at the warehouse apart, and none of the others had weak quirks. I mean, Hunji Hunakori had a strength enhancement quirk and they ripped him apart. The others died just as horribly, and the blood seemed to spray everywhere." Despite being aware of this, Tamura made the same choice. The woman who went by the name Nails stood up and departed after Tamura gave the order, "Just do it, Kurogiri. Nails, do not tell anyone else about what happened. Understood. Now go to the docks and join those there." Did not, however, visit the docks. Rather, she went to the closest airport, choosing to spend a few years somewhere else, regardless of the location. Tamura then listened to and watched the news announcement made by Izuku Midoriya. He was quite concerned about this. The majority of his League of Villains were already exhausted from facing the Guyver. It appeared to be a mass weapon of destruction, primarily because of that. Hell, Tamura witnessed firsthand the deadly nature of that thing. It would have been his head, not his left hand, if he had been an inch longer. Tamura leaned back, wishing he could seek counsel or advice from his master. "This is all I need now. Some child in alien armor ready to hunt down me and the rest," but was deprived of that choice. The mansion of Yaoyorozu, Momo quietly put on a knee-high robe and left her room at around 10 o'clock in the evening. She went 8 doors down, opened the door, and entered. She scowled a little when she saw how soundly Izuku was sleeping. It had been a long day, and she was certain he was tired, but she couldn't really blame him. But tonight was what she needed. Since they got back together and reconnected, they had not really had the opportunity to spend quality time together. She walked over to the double bed and gave him a quick peck on the lips. He looked up at her, blinked, and stirred. Momo grinned as Izuku said, "Sorry, I guess I dozed off." After removing her robe, she showed that she had nothing on. As he held up one side of the blankets, Momo said softly, "That is all right, as long as you do not fall asleep until afterwards." She slipped in beside him. She made a condom and gave it to him. She pulled him in close and gave him a passionate kiss while whispering, "Izzy, I love you." Izuku said, "I love you too, and the two quickly used the condom. Subsequently, she produced yet another. By 4 in the morning, Izuku had Momo firmly grasped him while she had him firmly grasped her. Momo decided she didn't care if her parents or Izuku's mother found out, and they were both sleeping with happy smiles. She felt content, safe, and in love for the time being. For her, that was all that mattered. Momo's mother Keiko and Izuku's mother both gasped loudly from the door at 7 a.m., waking them both. The two mothers hurried out and slammed the door. Looking at the nearly hysterical Inko Midoriya, Keiko remarked, "Well, that explains why Momo was not in her room last night." Inko decided to have a lengthy, stern conversation with her son and declared, "You are taking this a lot better than I am." Keiko gave a shrug. Inko continued to frown as Keiko confessed, "I kind of expected that the two were being intimate a long time ago. Come on Inko, they are both 16 and no matter what we say they are going to have 6. We cannot watch them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now I talked to Momo and she knows to practice safe 6 condoms. She is also on the pill." Inko continued to dislike it. She had to concur with some of that, though. In terms of legal standards of consent, 16 was now the new 18. This implied that they could marry the city magistrate if they so desired. Inko let out a breath and appeared to sag. Inko grimaced and swallowed. "You are right, I do not like it. But there is not much we can do. If they are going to." Keiko grinned as she said, "Have 6 then we really cannot stop them. But I am still going to have a long talk with my son about this." Keiko led Inko down to the kitchen after saying, "I am as well with my daughter," deciding that a stiff drink would be more suitable for them both than coffee. Inko laughed as she said, "Oh, and do not tell my husband Miyagi. I do not think he could handle knowing." Inko accepted the offered sake and gulped it down, saying, "He is not the only one. I wish I did not know." She extended her glass to take another shot. The two drank until they could bear the thought of their children doing what they knew they were doing, and Keiko followed suit. Izuku sat up on the bed back in the guest room, ensuring that a blanket was placed over him and Momo completely. As Momo nodded in agreement, Izuku remarked, "Okay, this is weird. I expected my mother to burst in here and really lay into at the very least me." Momo climbed out of bed and grabbed her robe from beneath the blanket, saying, "It is strange. Because I am expecting both would by now." She approached the door, she opened it and glanced back at Izuku. She shrugged, dropped the robe, and slipped back into bed, saying, "They are gone." Since they didn't have school until Monday, she wanted to spend the remainder of the day in bed with Izuku, which allowed them to rest and recuperate for a few days. Specifically, 4. Izuku said, "Maybe they are going to kill us later." Momo chuckled, snuggling against him again. Momo did not want to say what they could do because she knew they were not yet ready for it. "Or they know that legally we can. Well, we can do this, and if they try to break us up, we can go to the city court building and, in any case, not for a few more years." Momo had to laugh as Izuku went a little pale. Then he wiped the perspiration from his forehead and let out a sigh of relief, saying, "No Izzy, we are not going to do that. I love you and all, but I do not think either of us is ready to do that." Momo knew her mother would agree with Izuku when she said, "So they are not really going to approve but are afraid that we would. Still, my mom is going to really lay into me later." Momo embraced him tightly and closed her eyes, saying, "Let's worry about that later. Right now I am too tired and I want to spend a few more hours sleeping with you before we deal with that." I really enjoy him being there in her arms and holding her in his. Both of them fell back asleep. Upon their departure, both mothers merely requested that the two teenagers exercise caution and engage in safe sexual behavior. While Momo was walking Izuku in the garden, they were taken aback by this. 5 days later. It was simple to find an abandoned building, and as a bonus, there were about a dozen willing residents who were ready to become zoanoids. Since most of them had quirks that were at best mediocre, the idea appealed to them. Tanka was happy to have a greater number of powerful mutant creatures under his command now. During that time, Heinz and Torvin looked for hiding places used by the League of Villains. Tanka then ordered his new recruits to unleash themselves upon them after they had located one or two, allowing some of the aggression that the serum appeared to promote to be elevated by the new ones. He considered sending half a dozen to find and bring Momo Yaoyorozu to him during that period. However, he still lacked the time to court her into becoming his. There was a lot to do, particularly because their actions were attracting the hero's attention. One such hero had been dragged into their headquarters this morning by Pablo and his brother Ramirez, and Tanka tortured him for an hour before realizing that the government appeared to understand what the zoanoids were. He tore the man's head off his shoulders because he was afraid the government knew. He was aware that it was Izuku Midoriya who had notified the government and the heroes. The Guyver had somehow mentioned them to its host. As he gestured for a few others to handle the hero's head and body, Heinz asked, "What are we to do, sir?" Although he was concerned about the Guyver, Tanka stated, "It does not matter, not really. First we will deal with the League of Villains and then worry about the government and their lackeys." Based on his transcription of the alien symbols, none of the Zoanoid hybrids had the strength and power of the Guyver armor. However, none of them had to worry about that at the time because Izuku Midoriya was only 16 and not a pro hero. The government sending the child out to stop them was unlikely, in his opinion. Heinz shook his head in response to his question, "Have you found Tamura Shigaraki yet? I want to end him and have my revenge." With a menacing grin, Heinz answered, "No. I think the coward is hiding. None of his cronies had any idea where he is. None of the people at the League of Villains' last hideout knew that he had tortured a number of them. Keep looking. For now I believe it is time to relocate and not draw any more attention from the pro-heroes." Tanka grinned. In any case, Heinz and the others cheered, saying, "Not yet anyhow. Soon we will make our grand appearance and then my friend, the world will fear the zoanoids." Starting the packing process for a move. Packaging. Izuku packed his clothes, the items he wanted to take, and a few other essentials in just 2 hours. He wanted to be prepared because he and the rest of his class would be moving into the dorms in a few days. He had to almost laugh when he went to assist Momo with packing. As of right now, she had 5 sizable suitcases filled with the clothing she planned to bring. Izuku said, "I do not think you will have room for all those clothes, Em." She grinned at him and started packing another. As Momo started to stuff more clothes into it, it lay on her bed. Izuku moaned when Momo told him, "Well, if I have to, I will store most of these in my boyfriend's room." The headquarters of the Hero Administration. With a grimace, Toshinori Yagi, also known as All Might, looked through the autopsy report. The full details and the reason for the pro-hero Bonsai's death were contained in the 20-page report. Trying not to vomit, one of the administrators stated, "He was discovered earlier this morning." As Toshinori closed the file, the man and 2 others appeared pale. From what the coroners can tell, Taozuki Natsumi alias Bullhead Bonsai was tortured and then, well, the cause of death was that his head was basically torn from his body, unwilling to continue viewing the graphic pictures. Izuku Midoriya said that these zoanoids are vicious and incredibly strong. They would have to be able to do that to Bullhead Bonsai. Toshinori said and exhaled. He wished he hadn't been made to retire, wishing to track down and prosecute these creatures. The administrators nodded as he suggested, "You might want to send out a warning to all heroes and the agencies to be aware. Not to let their guard down. These zoanoids are extremely dangerous." The warnings were sent out right away. Izuku wrinkled his nose and peered into his closet. Momo's clothes now filled more than half of his closet. Dresses, skirts, pants, and coordinating shirts. There were more than 24 different types of shoes and sneakers at the bottom of the closet. She turned to one of the 2 dressers and found that one drawer was nearly full of her underwear. He slammed the drawer shut and collapsed on his bed in exasperation. I couldn't figure out how he consented to this. He prayed that Momo wasn't bringing more things to store in his room when his door suddenly flew open and she entered a minute later. Izuku complained as Momo said, "Hey Izzy, the others are all downstairs. Mina wants to do some sort of competition regarding our rooms." She took his hand and essentially pulled him downstairs, saying, "Oh come on, it sounds fun." Kirishima gasped as Mina threw open his closet as soon as they arrived at his room. The hardening quirker said, "Geez, who would guess that? Well, that you are a cross-dresser." He then grinned widely. The girl's clothes, which filled more than half of his closet, caught the attention of others. Some laughed, while others suppressed their own joy at the revelation. Izuku said sharply, "I am not a cross-dresser," but felt his cheeks get a little warmer. Momo defended him right away. Momo grinned after saying, "He isn't. He is just storing some of my clothes since I do not have room for them in my room." When people saw his closet, they would begin to think it was funny that in private, her boyfriend dressed like a girl. Then she was half relieved that nobody had opened his first dresser's top drawer. The others kept laughing while Izuku let out a loud groan. Izuku Midoriya now finds it amusing that he had to keep his girlfriend's extra clothes in his room. In an attempt to lighten the mood about living in the dorms under the watchful eyes of Iwaza and Takiyama, Mina said with glee, "Hey, let's move on. See who else has a deep dark secret." The girls then had the opportunity to evaluate other rooms. After that, the girls could be judged by the boys. Later, Momo made the decision to go outside and enjoy a pleasant walk with her boyfriend. Take some time to spend with him alone. She leaned closer to him and let out a sharp exhale as they walked hand in hand. "You know this is not going to be that great. I read over the rules and, well, they basically suck. There is a curfew and it prohibits anyone being in someone else's room after that. Also there is no public displays of affection in the common areas," Momo said with a slight sigh. Since the students were compelled to live on campus for safety reasons and the administration wished to restrict what would be considered typical teenage behavior, she was troubled by the statement, "They cannot limit it outside the campus, but they are enforcing the normal rules here in the dorms." Izuku added, frowning slightly, "Did you also notice that we have to sign in and out with either Iwaza or Takiyama if we want to leave the campus?" Momo wrinkled her nose at the thought that the teachers could prevent them from going if they so desired. "Yeah, I did, and I do not like the fact that we have to detail where we are going and what time we are expected to return." As they got closer to the boundary fence, a dark creature roared and leapt over it, surprising both of them. In an attempt to convince Tanka that he was an important member of the Zoanoid dynasty, Torvo Jenks personally captured Momo Yaoyorozu and engaged the child who possessed the Guyver. He switched back to his Zoanoid form as he approached the Ua fence. On his larger cranium head was a snot with 2-foot-long horns and a smaller horn above his nose. He roared loudly and pounded his chest like a gorilla. He is prepared to put his strength to the test against a brat with a big nose. Izuku recognized the object in front of them as a Zoanoid in real life. He pushed Momo away and turned on the Guyver. The armor slapped around him after ejecting from the back of his neck, positioned between the creature and Momo. With a growl, Torvo extended his dark-clawed arms and said, "Do yourself a favor, boy. I am here for her." As he prepared to fight, Izuku gave the order, "Run, Momo. Get help." Izuku just executed a spin left side kick, hitting the creature squarely in the sternum as it lunged at him. It bounced off the fence and sailed back. Its side slapped its clawed hand, knocking Izuku to one side and roaring once more. Izuku flipped sideways and rolled with the blow, landing on his feet again. Izuku grabbed Torvo's right forearm and slammed him to the ground when he lunged again. Torvo then kicked him, causing him to skid across the floor. Torvo stood and chuckled. Torvo growled as he tore a light post from the cement and swung it at Izuku, saying, "Tanka was right. That armor is impressive. But you are no match for my power and strength." Izuku leapt backward, avoiding the post, and then swung his blades. He held the blades at a downward angle as exhaust poured out the ports. Izuku stopped Torvo's next swing, cutting the pole nearly in two. Then whirled around and gave the creature a forceful kick to the head, causing Torvo to hit the ground with equal force. He rose and roared once more. "Zero." Momo was so worried about Izuku that she ran as fast as she could. I was pleading with any god who would listen to keep him safe. Breathless, she started beating on Iwaza's door, when the instructor arrived at the door. Izuku attacked. "Trouble, hurry," Momo exclaimed, panting as she attempted to describe the issue. At last, she took hold of his arm and tried to get him to the location where Izuku was most likely fighting for his life. Iwaza could sense that something serious was happening, but he had no idea what it was. He let Momo take him and hurried after her toward the boundary fence, observing that there was an intrusion because multiple red security lights were flashing. 0. Izuku watched as the hideous altered human stepped sideways while maintaining a defensive downward stance with his right hand blade aimed at the Zoanoid. Circling him in a way, Izuku tried to persuade the altered man to give up by saying, "This is foolish. I have already proven you are no match for me." Torvo lunged and then screamed as he impaled himself on the externally indestructible blade, roaring once more, through his chest. Just as Iwasa and Momo arrived, Izuku drew out the blade and saw the creature fall to the ground. Izuku said, deeply concerned that he had just killed someone, "It is not my fault." Iwasa raised his hand to the right. Iwasa knelt to check the creature's vitals and hurried back when it started to melt, saying, "I know. I saw." They watched in horror as what had once been a creature vanished entirely before their very eyes. Momo turned her back and looked at Izuku in his Guyver armor, gasping, "Gross." She didn't want to see any more, ecstatic that he appeared to be okay. After turning off the armor, Izuku moved aside to let Iwasa pass. Nodding and smiling reassuringly at first Momo, Iwasa jabbed at the rotting corpse with a nearby stick after remarking, "Well that is, interesting to say the least. So when these things die, they self-destruct." Iwasa winced a little as black slime covered the stick's end. As more teachers started to arrive on the scene, he stood and glanced at the two teenagers. "The lights and security alarms alerted me." The two departed after he gave the order, "Go back to the dorms. Stay there until we deem it safe." Momo took Izuku's hand right away and held onto it. The Zoanoid's secret lair. Tanka was not happy. Rather, he was furious. He grabbed a nearby table and smashed it into the wall after transforming into his Zoanoid form. What the fuck was Torvo thinking? He bellowed, his voice severe and loud. Tanka yelled at Hines, who retreated, "I told you all that I was not ready to confront the Guyver or take Momo Yaoyorozu yet." Hines attempted to clarify, but Tanka snarled once more. He thought he could take him. He wanted to prove to you that he was a valuable member. Tanka snarled, "Stupid fool." Before gradually becoming calm. Sitting heavily, he still felt the urge to tear something or someone apart. Fucking idiot. Now the heroes will know, and that ruins any chance of a covert attempt to confront the Guyver or get Momo Yaoyorozu. They will be on guard. If Torvo had really survived and come back, he would use his bare-clawed hands to rip the opportunistic idiot to pieces. Hines appeared to relax. "Well, on the plus side, we have learned that the Guyver is able to defeat us." Thinking that Tanka was going to be ripped to pieces for delivering the bad news, and he believed this. Tanka stood up as Hines grinned and said, "Oh, and I do have some good news, sir. I have located another of the League of Villains hideouts." Tanka led Hines out of the room, while 3 others waited to follow. "I really have the urge to. I need to work off some of this aggression." "Good, I will go with a few of the others." They all nodded when he said, "I want a few prisoners on this one. They might know where that coward Tamura is hiding." The main structure. Recovery girl cautiously inserted a probe into the remains. She placed a sample on a tile, brought it over to her microscope, and examined the cell structure in greater detail. Disgusting. But it would appear that once the subject dies, the altered cells within the body disintegrate, taking the host with it. She informed Iwasa, Principal Nezu, Takiyama, and the pro-hero Night Eye, who responded, "Before I can tell you what this is or how it changed this man's body, I will need to send samples to Island and the biomedical lab." Night Eye said, "So this thing was a man at one time?" And Recovery Girl gave a nod. Recovery Girl started collecting samples and putting them in sealed vials. "Oh yes. But something changed his cells into this. Other than that, I have no idea how or anything else of value. Not until it is fully analyzed, that is." Night Eye grimaced at the sight of the heap of what had once been a human being and declared, "I will make a full report to the Hero Administration. In the meantime, the police have dispatched several units to patrol the perimeter. Until we have some more answers, that is about all we can do." The hero added. Takiyama decided to move her from her room next to the dorms to the room next to the young girls' dorms when she said, "Until then we are restricting the students from leaving the campus. Especially Izuku Midoriya and Momo Yaoyorozu. It seems that the reports are right, this Martin Tanka has a perverse fascination with Yaoyorozu, primarily to guarantee the young girl's safety. To avoid interfering with her, Nimari did not want Momo and Izuku to feel that they could no longer be together because she was aware that they were a couple. When Momo moved in, she would tell her that. In the dormitories, Sitting on Izuku Midoriya's lap on a couch in the common room, Momo Yaoyorozu held on to him tightly. Her adrenaline was starting to run out, and she was trembling a little from what she had witnessed. Making her feel both exhausted and cold, she took solace in the fact that he clung to her just as firmly. He used his right hand to caress her back. Momo cried a little at first, but now that she was positive Izuku was okay, all she wanted to do was hold him, to be in his grasp. She eventually felt better, but she continued to sit on his lap. Momo bit her lower lip as Izuku firmly stated, if any of them, if Tanka tries to hurt you, there won't be anywhere he can hide that I won't find him. Izuku let out a sharp sigh as Momo said, I don't think he wants to really hurt me. Have me, but not hurt me. Izuku exclaimed, over my dead body. And Momo huddled up to him. She smiled a little because she knew her boyfriend would always look out for her. Momo jabbed her right index finger into his chest and said, none of that, Izzy. I want to be a hero and I do not want you risking yourself to protect me. I can protect myself. He nodded grudgingly when she asked, do I make myself clear? She leaned in to give him a kiss and inserted her tongue into his open mouth, saying, even though it is really sweet that you, love me enough to want to keep me safe. She started to move her hips on his lap, pulling him against her. A voice interrupted them, whoops. Momo immediately stopped kissing her boyfriend. Takiyama, also known as Midnight, is standing off to one side when you look over, blushing a little. I did not mean to interrupt. But I need to inform you too that you are being restricted to campus for the time being. For your personal safety. Also that is bending the rules a bit, she said and Momo grinned. Momo glared at the teacher and exclaimed, great, we can't even leave. It's bad enough that we can't do anything on campus, but now we can't leave to do anything. Snarling, she said, it is not fair. Nimari could understand that, in this case, the school administration was preventing the students from being normal teenagers in addition to making them live in the on-campus dorms, preventing them from expressing themselves to one another and from forming relationships. I will talk to Principal Nezu. Maybe we can adjust the rules that inside the dorms and not in public view, some displays can be acceptable. Nimari replied and then turned. She decided to share her idea to change the rules with Iwaza before leaving, saying, go ahead and do whatever you were doing. She was aware that the stick in the mud would not be pleased, of course, but she was wise enough to avoid trying to stop teenagers from being teenagers. A deserted hotel on the other side of town. The Hotel Hindogo used to be a glitzy venue that required reservations months in advance. It was now only a dilapidated remnant of its former self. As Tanka and his fellows unleashed their savage fury on the roughly 10 league of villains who had previously hidden there from the heroes, death screams erupted from a number of the rooms. Unaware that they were being pursued by a more dangerous person, Tamura Shigaraki had made the decision not to warn his people to be vigilant. The people there were now bearing the consequences of their leader's choice. From her hiding spot, Hiko Hanashi gaped and covered her ears to block out the screams and the savage growls and roars. As her fellow league of villains were ripped apart, she was utterly terrified. Some endured constant torture. Hiko heard her cousin being mauled in the adjacent room and muttered, "Oh please God help me." Her eyes were watering. She winced as he screamed and pleaded for the torture to end. As he and the others battled the invaders, Lee Hanashi had instructed her to hide. She did so, and now she wishes she had chosen a location where she could get away before the monsters discovered her. She had no desire to pass away. She was able to spit napalm because of her quirk. However, at the moment, she was unable to produce enough saliva to spit at all. If not, she would leave after burning a hole in the wall. Hiko screamed as she was lifted from her hiding spot by a strong clawed hand that grabbed her arm. Another monster entered the tiny space as a growling voice said, "Hey look boss, I found one." Tanka grinned broadly and said, "Good work, Ramirez." He laughed as he moved toward the young girl who was having trouble. He reached up and touched Hiko's chin with one of his clawed fingers, saying, "She is rather attractive." She passed out instantly. He gave the order, and Ramirez grinned back, "I think we might not kill this one. She might provide me with some entertainment. So take her back to the lair." Hines went in, as he had instructed, cleaning his clawed hands of blood. Tanka shrugged when Hines remarked, "What about those others? We do have a couple survivors and they have no idea where Shigaraki is." Tanka commanded and changed back to human form in order to approach the unconscious young girl and truly admire her. "They are worthless then. Kill them, oh and make it extremely unpleasant." She was not a lot like Momo Yaoyorozu. However, she was pretty enough to play with a little. Date night, because they were essentially restricted to the UA school campus or the dorms. Izuku made the decision to alleviate Momo's annoyance, filling a cooler bag with a few sandwiches and a few sodas. Momo was taken to the roof by him, spreading a blanket. When she sat down on the blanket and he gave her a sandwich and a can of soda, Momo grinned broadly and said, "Izzy, this is perfect. A picnic on the roof. Some time alone." As he bit into his own sandwich, Izuku grinned and said, "I thought you would like this, M." Momo asked, hoping he had something to do besides eat, "So what are your plans after we eat?" Izuku gave her a smile. Momo shrugged and Izuku said, "Well, we can sit here and watch the sunset and, well beyond that I have no idea." Momo smiled slyly and said, "That is okay, I have an idea of what we can do." Izuku placed his hands behind his head and reclined on the blanket after they had both finished eating. Momo joined him, partially on top of him, after he had finished unwinding. She put her head on her hands after resting her hands on his chest. She closed her eyes. She acknowledged yawning as she let out a slow breath, saying, "I am so comfortable right now, I could easily go to sleep. I'm really enjoying this." She fell asleep in a matter of moments. They didn't care if the teachers or any of the others discovered them. She woke up an hour later to Izuku's faint snoring. With the exception of the external lights, it was completely dark and the sun had set. Momo gave him a gentle shake. He woke up with a little moan as she said, "Izzy, it's dark outside. We'd better get inside before the bugs eat us alive." Lying on the hard roof had left his ass and back sore. She assisted him in sitting up as well. Momo grinned at Izuku when he said, "Not what I would say was a great date." Momo leaned in to give him a kiss, saying, "No, it was. Anytime we can be together alone is a great date," then got up to assist him in packing up the picnic. Momo made the decision to disregard the rules while traveling, which would be the biggest surprise given her general obsession with the rules. She desired to stay overnight with her boyfriend, though. She wanted to sleep with him tonight at the very least, but she wasn't against having sex. He stared at her in disbelief as she followed him into his room. Momo grinned as Izuku said, I do not think this is a good idea. What if we are caught? It is after curfew." Momo shoved him onto his bed and joined him, saying, "Fuck those stupid rules. I am spending the night with you." She made a condom and gave it to him after they had been making out for a few minutes. Determining that they would nevertheless engage in sexual activity, decided that their intimacy would not be hindered by the rules of the school. The lair. Hiko Hanashi, 17, attempted to free herself again while chained to a nearby wall, but the metal resisted her napalm. She was now aware of the pain her quirk caused when she burned and disfigured her victims. She was filled with terror, startled by every sound outside the door, expecting one of those monsters to enter at any moment and tear her to pieces in agony. For a few minutes, she was relieved to be alive after waking up here. However, since she was only wearing her bra and underwear, she was now terrified of what they planned to do to her. While she was unconscious, her other clothing had been taken off. She kept thinking about one or more of the creatures entering and doing heinous and disgusting things to her. She winced a little when the door opened and a man who looked normal walked in. With trembling hands, Hiko followed the man's instructions after he unlocked her chains and threw her a robe. "Put this on. The boss wants to see you." He led her into another room, where she noticed an older man waiting, with the man at her heels. The man whispered, "If you want to live, do what he wants," and walked away. The leader of these monsters was on top of her when she lay on a bed 20 minutes later. As she felt him, she tried not to show her disgust at being used in this manner, so she kept her eyes closed. Even though she wasn't a virgin, she always wanted to be at least attracted to the person she slept with. At least the murdering psychopath was wearing a condom, and for that she was thankful. After he was done, he lay down next to her. Hiko shuddered at the idea of being his plaything as Tanka said, "That was perfect. I may have to keep you around for a while." However, she would stop at nothing to avoid their murder, even serve as a toy. The primary hiding place of the League of Villains. Kurogiri told Tamura, who calmly looked up at the shadowy figure, "We lost another hideout. Did any of them know about this location?" Tamura asked casually, thinking that since the other hideouts there were essentially just cannon fodder, it didn't really matter about those other hideouts, to be given up. The Vanguard Action Squad and a few other individuals present were the members who were important. Not that the others didn't matter. However, it was crucial that Tamura's location remained unknown to Tanka and his monsters. Kurogiri said, "No, though we are running out of our supporters." Tamura shrugged. Kurogiri shook his shadowy head in response to Tamura's question, "They are not important." "Has Dabi found Tanka yet?" Tamura nodded, laughing at the possibility that some of those moronic heroes might be killed while attempting to apprehend Tanka and his monsters. Kurogiri asked, "No, but he believes that he has a clue where they might be. Do you want him and the others to take them out or leak the information to the heroes so that they can do our dirty work?" Tamura gave the order, and Kurogiri told Dabi, "Yes. Just make sure Dabi knows that Tanka must not survive." The League of Villains leader then returned to the main, more significant task, rebelling against the status quo and the government. Since Tanka has decreased their numbers, they are also recruiting other people who were suitable candidates to join the League of Villains. Obtaining an anonymous call that provided the police with Tanka and the Zoanoid's precise location. The Hero Administration was informed by the police that there had not been another gathering of heroes and police since the League of Villains raid. Endeavor was in charge of the initial command, preparation, and implementation. As a result, he was given command of nearly 100 police officers and more than a dozen professional heroes. He had carefully gone over the information that Izuku Midoriya had given him to make sure he understood everything that he was going to encounter. It is not assumed that these Zoanoids will be as durable as the Guyver armor. After all, according to what Endeavor had heard, both were created by the same enigmatic aliens. He outlined his raid strategy while standing in front of the assembled heroes. He then went up to the government liaison who had been assigned and present at the briefing. Endeavor grinned as the small man stated, "I have been given the authority to provide whatever more assistance you require." Before the government liaison could argue, he said, "Good. Because I have one request. I want the UA student Izuku Midoriya to be there." Without informing the man that Endeavor thought the Guyver might be the only thing that had been proven to be 100% effective against those creatures, they said, "I know he is just a student, but his knowledge of these Zoanoids may be needed on site and without delay." He knew firsthand that the Guyver might be even more powerful than himself, but he didn't think they could defeat his Inferno, or on par with All Might. Endeavor frowned down at the man and the government liaison said sheepishly, "I do not know, sir. The school might object to placing a student in harm's way. There are specific rules and regulations that prohibit his involvement. Like you just said, you have full authority to provide whatever assistance I may require." "Well, I require the Guyver to be there. Also, I believe the government can reward Izuku Midoriya or rather the Guyver a special provisional hero license without taking the examination." Endeavor said, and the liaison took a deep breath, then gave a nod. The man pulled out his cell phone and forwarded Endeavor's request, saying, "I will contact my superiors and relay your request." 0. It would be an understatement to say that Iwaza was unhappy, so he made the decision to accompany Endeavor and personally express his displeasure at having one of his students put in danger before Izuku Midoriya was prepared. Additionally, he accompanied Endeavor to ensure that the young man was not in danger. Even with its immense strength and power, the Guyver was still only a 16-year-old boy. Iwaza stood to one side and watched Midoriya closely after voicing his displeasure to the now #1 hero. Endeavor said, "Is everyone in position, Gunhead?" And Gunhead gave a nod. "Yes, Endeavor. The building is now totally encircled." Hiko Hanashi could almost see the police and heroes inside through the boarded-up windows. She licked her parched lips and started hacking in an attempt to summon enough saliva, but it was insufficient, and as she spat, the wood started to burn. Hiko muttered, "Better to be arrested than be that asshole's plaything." Fortunately, it had worked, and she had a foot-sized hole in the wooden boards. She broke the cracked glass with an old lamp and then stuck her head out the window, saying, "Help me. Up here, aid me." She yelled loudly and then slipped her right arm out the window and waved. "Please help me," she begged. Izuku looked up at the window next to Endeavor and saw the girl, who was yelling for assistance and waving wildly. "Who is Officer Kong?" Endeavor ordered. "Take an image and identify her." He had been preparing to cover the entire building with his Inferno flames, eliminating the threat of the creatures in a single blow. If the girl was innocent, he would have to wait. The officer took a picture of her and then entered her image into the database. Hanashi Hiko, 17, out of Hiroshima. Endeavor sighed as Kane told him, wanted for multiple assaults with a deadly quirk and some other minor infractions. Izuku in his Guyver armor leapt in front of Endeavor as he said, then she is not an innocent and an acceptable loss. Endeavor was once again focused on vaping up his ultimate inferno blast. No, she is wanted and might be a criminal. However, she is also someone who needs assistance. Endeavor glanced down at the armored teenager. Izuku said angrily, not quite believing that a pro-hero would summarily execute someone. The effort required to send in a rescue team is not worth it for her. Endeavor growled, feeling his flames reach their peak, and said, now stand aside and let me end the threat of these things once and for all. Instead of moving aside, Izuku turned and ran toward the building at full speed, smashing glass and boards as he went through another window. She is a criminal and deserves whatever happens to her. Izuku was attacked by an insect-type zoanoid inside the building right away. Knowing he didn't have time, he slammed his fist as hard as he could into the sternum, hearing cracking sounds as his punch seemed to almost go all the way into the monster. He turned to face the wall separating the rooms, and he jumped through it with a crash, the wooden chipboard disintegrating as he went through it. Himiko looked at him in complete shock and terror, and Izuku quickly turned his head to one side, realizing that the girl was completely nude. Wrap that sheet around you. He gave the order, and she jolted out of her reverie. He went to the window through which she had burned a hole, spun, kicked, and smashed a larger hole where the window had been. He grabbed Himiko in his arms and flew out of it, and a second later the building burst into flames. He landed next to the police line, where 4 police officers and 2 paramedics took custody of Himiko Hanashi, who turned to face him as one of the officers placed handcuffs on her wrists. Izuku turned to face the now modified Endeavor, and Himiko said, thank you. She was escorted to a police car. You are aware that Shoto, your son, is correct. Izuku said, you are a royal piece of shit, and then he walked back to where Iwaza was grinning. He then verbally reprimanded Izuku for putting his life in danger once more, but he also had to acknowledge that he did it to save someone's life. Without a judge and jury, even a criminal did not deserve the death penalty. The dorms in Class 1A. With her arms wrapped around her knees, Momo sat on one of the couches in the girls-only sitting room and continued to gaze at her cell phone. Call me now. Tell me you're safe, please. When the door opened, she knew it had to be one of the other girls entering because only girls had the keys to the door and boys were not permitted in the room. She muttered in frustration, it had been an hour since Izuku had left, and I hated not knowing. She looked over and saw Mina Ishido, Kyoka Jiro, and Toru Hagekar enter, followed by Nimari Kayama, also known as Midnight. Toru looked down at Momo, who gave a sharp exhale and hugged her knees closer to her. We came to check on you. He hasn't given me a call yet. Nimari sat across from Momo, who said softly, he was supposed to call me to let me know he is alright. Momo looked at her phone again, but there were still no calls or texts. They just showed up on the scene, if they are adhering to the raid's timeline. He probably cannot call yet. Nimari said soothingly, and Momo bit her bottom lip, trying to will the phone to ring. Suddenly there was a pounding on the door and Katsuki Bakugo could be heard yelling for someone to open the door. The teacher stood and went to the door and opened it. Bakugo, you are not allowed in here. The spike-haired blonde teen glared inwardly as Nimari said this firmly. All I want to know is whether what I heard is accurate. Was Deku actually granted a provisional hero license by the government? Nimari nodded as Katsuki snarled. Nimari told him, yes they did. Katsuki screamed in anger and shook his fists in the air. What the fuck, I will roast him as soon as I get my hands on him. Momo lost it when Katsuki roared, and she walked over to the teenager and gave him a glare. What's the matter with you? Once more, Izuku is dangerous, and all you care about is that someone else has surpassed you. Attempt not to be such a jerk. Momo screamed, slamming the door in the other person's face and almost hitting Katsuki with it. Then she began to cry and wailing as she slumped to the floor. Nimari knelt in front of the emotional girl and gave her a hug, reassuring her repeatedly that Midoriya would be okay and that he would call her soon. Mina and Toru also knelt to support their friend. I can't keep going through this. Every time he does this, all I can think is that I may never see him again. She stammered out, sobbing and weeping as she held on to Nimari. The teacher shook her head. Normally, UA students aren't exposed to what you've all been through until they end up as an agency hero's sidekick. In order to ensure that Mina Ishido and Turo Hagakure heard her and not just Momo Yaoyorozu, Nimari explained, it gives you time to become accustomed to the dangers and the hazards that all heroes face. It allows you to understand when one you are in love with is asked to face those dangers and you accept it as normal. So, once more, You are all expected to learn something quickly. Momo listened and gave the teacher a tight hug before letting her go gradually. To learn to deal with those you care about are placed in danger. You're correct. It is simply very difficult to accept that he will be in perilous circumstances. Momo said, I'll probably pose similar risks, and he'll have to accept that. Nimori nodded. Yes, I propose that we all take a seat now, and maybe Kyoka Jiro, Tsuyu Asui, and Ochako Uraraka will join us, so that we can all talk about this more. Nimori recommended it, and Mina got in touch with them to invite them to the girls' sitting room. The raid. They had discovered at least 6 dozen bodies, all of them starting to break apart, but they were informed that there were at least 20 of the zoanoids. Mount. Lady shifted through the rubble, lifted a sizable chunk of it, and winced. Over here. Izuku was over talking to the young girl he had saved when she said loudly, it looks like a bunch of them escaped down through this hole. Endeavor then walked over, followed by Gunhead, Kamui Woods, and Iwaza. With a sharp exhale, Endeavor glared down the man-made hole and growled, son of a. Knowing exactly who botched the entire raid, not Izuku Midoriya, but someone who was supposed to be a professional, Iwaza said, looks like this is not over after all. As he made his way back to the patrol car, he heard Hiko Hanashi share with Izuku what she had discovered while she was in captivity. That sicko Taranka continued to boast after, well, I'd rather not discuss that. He would talk a lot about his plans and what he wanted to accomplish, Hiko said somberly and somewhat angrily, but it was really disturbing and disgusting. I believe he wanted to make an impression on me. He therefore intends to seize control of the League of Villains before producing more of those items. Not wanting to reveal that the creep also intended to inject her and transform her into a monster, she took a deep breath and shuddered a little before telling Izuku and then the older man with the red-rimmed eyes, then he planned to take over the country. She then gave Izuku a charming smile. Izuku said, I am sorry you had to go through all that. Hiko let out a slow breath and then stopped grinning. I'm still here. Many of my comrades, actually, aren't. They were torn to pieces by fucking monsters. I believe you should be aware that Sidito has a serious crush on Momo Yaoyorozu, and he kept referring to me as such while he was. Perhaps you should warn her. I shouldn't have to put him through what I did. Hiko grinned again and said, oh, you know the cops say I should at most might get 2 years in jail. She said this with regret, realizing how close she had come to becoming one of those monsters, or worse to still be used by that jerk Taranka. The girl winked at Izuku and said, any chance you might want to keep in touch, and maybe after I get out, you are really cute and perhaps you might keep me out of trouble. Before Izuku could respond, Iwaza closed the police car's door and led Izuku away. When they were far enough away for Hiko to hear him, Izuku said, thank you sir. Wow, that is one disturbed girl. He muttered, then realized he needed to call or text Momo. He took out his phone and sent a text, knowing that Momo would never be able to hear him because of all the sirens and other noises, so he typed out a message quickly. Then he texted, I'm fine. I should be home in an hour or so. I love you, Izzy. We might as well let Endeavor tidy up his mess and go. As Izuku Midoriya climbed into the passenger side of the teacher's car, Iwaza remarked, this was a complete disaster. Hopefully if there is another raid, they find someone that is not a total idiot to command it. He then drove back to the UA campus. 5 miles away, the sewers. Taranka led the survivors of the hero and police raid away from their destroyed lair, sloshing among the rancid waters. They had lost 9 of their fellow zoanoids in that raid. 7 were burned inside, and 2 were crushed under tons of cement as they went down into the sewers. Now that he had only 10 left, the loss was made worse by the fact that all but 1 of the serum was destroyed in the flaming attack, leaving him with only 1 remaining of the serum that made him the strongest of the group, of the one he did not want to give to anyone else. When one of the others caught up to him, he felt the urge to vent his rage on the man, but that would be foolish because he could not afford any more losses at the moment. Master, the man, who had enormous ears and Taranka knew he had enhanced hearing, said, we were betrayed by an anonymous call. Taranka growled as the man said, I heard as we passed that last sewer grate. The League located us, thus, they made the decision to let the heroes and police take us out. Taranka said in a gravely voice etched with anger, now really wanting to find Tamura and end him once and for all. Jin, keep your ears open. Hines moved next to Taranka and said, make sure we are not being followed or have been located. The large-eared creature obeyed his command and kept his ears open. All right, sir, what will we do at this point? I mean, we lost the serum, Hines said, and Tanka stopped moving. He wasn't sure what to do, but he knew that he had to come up with a plan to recover from this catastrophe if he wanted to actually acquire power. We can make at least 20 more people like me with the one we still have. The thing that bothered Tanka the most was that he was expecting to go and get Momo himself soon, which was now impossible. It is a pity that I could not bring that girl along, he said, before beginning to walk once more. But for now, we need to find a new lair and then find Tamura Shigaraki and tear him apart for betraying me again. He said softly to Hines, I really enjoyed playing with her, and the other person shrugged. I'm positive I can find you another partner to play with, sir. Unless you want me to go get Momo Yaoyorozu for you, maybe taking Grimes. Tanka shook his head in response to Hines' offer. No, you can't take the chance. Along with a few pro-heroes, that Guyver and that boy would most likely be present. Despite my desire to play with her, I am unable to lose you or anyone else at this time. Perhaps later, when we have enough people again, we will be able to send more than 2. Perhaps the only way to succeed is to have strength in numbers. Hines nodded as Tanka said, so just find me someone else to play with and that will be fine. The residence halls. Momo was standing outside when she saw the increased number of police cars circling outside the campus grounds, along with a few mid-level pro-heroes who now patrolled the campus grounds themselves. However, her true target was Iwasa's blue Chevy sedan, which she would use to contain her Izuku. She bounded down the steps and, before Izuku was ready, jumped onto him, knocking him down on the grass. She locked onto his lips, held him tightly, and then moved her mouth over by his right ear. Oh, by the way, the news had broadcast your little stunt. You and I are going to have a long talk about that, later. She whispered in his ear as she hugged him, still lying on top of him. When she had seen his actions on the TV, she had an overwhelming urge to really chastise him for being so stupid. But she could tell that the young girl needed help, and since no one else was about to give that help. Of course Izuku would. It was not just that she wanted to talk to him about. There was the issue of another broadcast that came right after the first one. She needed to really discuss that. After everyone that was basically his friends greeted him, Momo took him into one of the other rooms. He was ready for her to lay into him for what happened, but she had him sit across from her. Izzy, I think we have a problem, she said, and Izuku exhaled sharply. Remembering that Momo had broken up with him just a few weeks prior and that they had gotten back together, Izuku muttered, oh no, not this again. Momo took his 2 hands in hers and stepped closer, asking, come on Em, do we really need to go through this again? No, Izzy, that isn't it. It is about this. Momo held out her phone and replayed the news conference. A high-place official was standing behind a podium. The official relayed that after careful consideration they wished to announce that they were going to recommend that Izuku Midoriya aka the Guyver no longer attend to a full-time. That he only attend part-time for just academics and the rest of the day he become a part-time sidekick for one of the agencies. When the conference ended she gazed over at him. You need to accept this, Izzy. Izuku sighed and winced. I think I am just holding you back right now. Izuku confessed, I was hoping to tell you about that later. Mr. Iwasa spoke to me on the way back. Other than saying that I am wasting both my time and the teacher's by continuing to be a full-time student, he essentially said the same thing to me, that the practical training isn't actually teaching me anything useful. He told her, and Momo frowned a little, that I am only holding myself back from my full potential to remain. So, when would you have informed me that Melissa had chosen to no longer be your hero partner for essentially the same reason? Momo inquired, and Izuku flinched once more, forgetting that the girls had a habit of chatting among themselves. Izuku replied quickly, about the same time I was going to tell you about the recommendation. Momo laughed, not really believing it, and said, I assume it will be alright with you if I am a part-time student. She smiled happily when he told her, I discovered that I can still live here and that I do not leave until after 1 p.m. for whatever agency that I select to sign onto. She had been afraid that they would require Izuku to move out and that she would only see him on the weekends. To which agencies are you thinking of applying? Momo inquired, and this time she saw Izuku start to wriggle, looking really bad. All right, so this is Iwasa's idea, not mine. Izuku went on to babble, and Momo could tell he was worried she would be offended. He thinks I need to be a positive addition to the one he suggests, and I can tell you that I am reluctant to even consider. Which agency? Izuku swallowed dryly as Momo asked sternly. Izuku muttered, "The mountain agency." Momo approached, observing as he lowered his eyes to the ground, appearing somewhat pale. "Raise your voice. Which agency was it?" Momo said it again, but she nearly heard what the agency said. "The agency of the mountains." Izuku said remorsefully, "I would be Mt. Lady's sidekick." Momo winced and breathed in and out. "I will never in a million years, not in this lifetime, just let that happen." Izuku laughed and took her clenched fists. "She is a. Well, she acts like a." Momo yelled loudly, standing up and glaring down at Izuku. There were a lot of words she wanted to use to describe Takiyama Yu, also known as Mount Lady, but none of them were polite. She snarled and flopped back on her seat. Momo gave him a fierce look as Izuku said, "You know you are really cute when you are jealous. You know you can trust me, I would never do anything," Momo said. "Regardless of who it is," he said, and Momo let out a sharp sigh. "Oh, I have faith in you. But I don't trust her," Momo said coldly, deciding that before Izuku joined the mountain agency, she wanted to talk to Takiyama for a long time about keeping her hands off of him, under threat of her kicking the blonde hero's huge ass from one end of the city to the other. She complained for 2 more hours, and Izuku chose not to tell her that the government was imposing restrictions on him as a sidekick, the most important of which was that he was not to use his chest blast unless it was an emergency, and if he did, the government wanted to hold a hearing to discuss whether it was a legitimate use. He had heard that they thought his chest blast was similar to a WMD, weapon of mass destruction. When it came to staying in Izuku's room after curfew, Momo Yaoyorozu was in no mood to follow any of the rules. She needed to make sure he understood that his ass and everything else belonged to her because she was still feeling jealous. Just her. Thus, having sex during the night kind of validated that. She got dressed and kissed him good morning an hour before everyone else would be getting up. She started to sneak out his door and nearly bumped into Kyoka Jiro as she emerged from Shoto Todoroki's room. Momo could see that Kyoka's bra and underwear were tucked inside the black shoes that the petite girl was holding in her arms. Watching Kyoka gasp and her face go white, she laughed, looking extremely guilty. Momo grinned broadly and said, "Oh, look at that. Sneaking out of a boy's room so early in the morning. I wonder what you two were up to last night." Kyoka bit her lip. Shoto's room door was closed to prevent Momo from seeing him sprawled out on the bed, naked. Then she grinned too. Kyoka pointed to the fact that Momo had just left Izuku's room and said, "About the same thing you were." She said, "Isn't those the same clothes you had on yesterday?" And they moved back to their separate rooms. Momo whispered, "So how long have you two been?" Kyoka flushed. Then he shrugged. "About 2 weeks. This is our 3rd time where we spent the night together," replied Kyoka. She replied, "So you and Izuku, how long?" And Momo grinned. As they got closer to Mina Ishido's room, Momo whispered, "At I Island after that fiasco and then about 4 no 5 times since. I take it you found out that you like having sex with your boy toy." Kyoka nodded, not wanting their friend to overhear them. Momo grinned as Kyoka said, "Oh yeah. So since we both broke the rules, I take it you are not going to tell anyone." Kyoka scowled and shook her head when Momo said, "Of course not. But it is nice to know that you two are getting along really well. So has he said the L word yet?" As she paused to open her door, Kyoka remarked, "No, but he almost did a couple of times." "Well, I better take a shower and get ready for the day." Entering. Then Momo followed suit in her own room. Prepare for another school day by taking a shower. Izuku got up and made his way to his bathroom. After reviewing the restrictions that the government had determined, he and Mt. Lady had to go to the mountain agency this afternoon to sign a 6-month contract. In fact, he had to accept Iwasa's recommendation. As a result, the only way Mt. Lady could react quickly was to walk there and use her quirk. Her issue was that she frequently needed to exercise extreme caution to avoid causing significant collateral damage. However, Izuku, who was as capable of flying as the Guyver, would take her to an incident. This would significantly speed up her reaction time without causing any harm. He was aware that Momo had absolutely no faith in the blonde heroine, but it was still brilliant. Takiyama Yu seemed to exude raw hormonal sexuality and was known for being a flirt. She was incredibly attractive and seductive, to layman's terms. As a jealous person, Momo was not particularly happy about becoming Takiyama's sidekick. He took a shower, changed into his school uniform, and went downstairs. He chose to have a strawberry Pop-Tart this morning rather than a fancy breakfast. Katsuki roared, "Deku, as he walked into the kitchen, charging directly at Izuku, who was peacefully chowing down on his Pop-Tart. Do not think that you are better than me just because you are going to be a sidekick. The spiky blonde teen screamed, giving Izuku a fierce look. Izuku said calmly, would not even try to think that Kachan. Katsuki frowned and then moved closer to give him a glare. Well done. Do not misunderstand. I will soon surpass you. Therefore, don't screw up and get demoted because I'll kick your ass if you do. As more people started to enter, Katsuki snarled and grabbed the other Pop-Tart that was still in the toaster before storming out. Izuku smirked and shook his head, and Katsuki congratulated Izuku on his success in his own way. Watching as the explosive angry teenager calmed down as he approached Ochako, the girl merely grinned at him, and everyone could see the animosity seemed to fade. Izuku Midoriya's first half of the day, as the government had stated, consisted of academic subjects such as math, language, science, and social studies. He sat with Momo and a few of their friends for lunch, and after watching the clock a few times, he realized that he would soon have to go to the mountain agency. Since he now had permission to fly there, he was able to land at the mountain agency with some reluctance, but after deactivating the armor, he entered, and a few minutes later, he was at the Mount Agency's headquarters. The door exploded open, and Takiyama gave him a big smile. Welcome, Midoriya. Izuku swallowed and then attempted to smile as she exclaimed, do you realize how wonderful it is that you chose my agency to be my sidekick? She continued to smile at him as Izuku told her, well actually Mr. Iwaza suggested that I come here. Though it did make sense. The older woman's enthusiasm was unfazed by this, and she nearly pulled him inside by grabbing his wrist. Oh, before I forget. According to the Hero Administration, I may not have the necessary experience to train you. Night I will therefore visit you twice a week for approximately an hour to lecture you on how to be a hero. She said, I hope that is okay, and motioned for him to take a seat on one side of her desk while she sat down behind it. A contract and a detailed list of the restrictions that had been placed on him were in front of them. Now I had my accountants dawdle with the amounts and I figure this is about average of what other sidekicks receive. She pointed to the third paragraph of the contract, and Izuku's mouth dropped open. It was approximately 100 more than his mother's monthly payment from his father for child support and alimony. You have to remember that this is what you get for being my part-time sidekick. As Izuku read the basic contract, she told him, I will have my accounts increase that amount if and when you graduate and want to be my full-time sidekick. The Hero Administration lawyers had drafted it without any hidden agendas or clauses that could later bite Izuku in the ass. Takiyama signed it, took off the top copy, and put it in her drawer. She gave him the second copy, folded the third, and placed it in an envelope to be mailed to the Hero Administration. All right, now for the boring stuff. They took a break an hour later. I need to go over the restrictions with you. I have a question for you, MT. Lady. The blonde heroine grinned when Izuku asked. You can call me Taki or Takiyama. Because if it's okay with you, I'm going to call you Izuku. Izuku sighed and furrowed his brow as Takiyama said, go ahead and ask. As he spoke, Izuku stumbled and stammered, and Takiyama couldn't help but laugh. Okay, I hate to ask this, but you see I have a girlfriend and she is a little concerned, because she sort of has been reading some disturbing magazine articles, and she would really like to talk to you. Oh, those. Yes, I understand why she might be a little worried. No, Izuku, I'm not at all like those articles describe me. No, I'm not a seductress, to use a polite phrase. Takayama shook her head and said, I can assume that your girlfriend I heard it was Momo Yaoyoro, is that correct? I have 6 with any male that happens to cross my path. Izuku grinned and nodded, saying, I would be concerned that I might act inappropriately toward you. Therefore, if she wants to speak with me, I can reassure her that I don't intend to use her in that manner. Izuku appeared to relax after she told him, then it is okay with me. Takayama nodded and then let out a sharp exhale when Izuku said, thank you, Mount. Takayama, I will bring her by to meet you this Saturday if that is all right. Takayama leaned back and picked up the list, saying, well, let's finish these stupid restrictions and then I will show you the mountain agency. The new lair, other than the fact that they had been forced to live in an old, abandoned subway station, Taranka was irritated by the smell and the dampness, but he was most irritated by the fact that they were unable to find any willing volunteers. The recent death and destruction of some of their members seemed to turn off any potential members that Hines and the others approached, and those who had previously considered joining were now uninterested. As a result, all he had to work with were those here, even though it was sufficient for his immediate plans to take over the League of Villains. After that, he would force volunteers to join him, have a molecular scientist examine the one serum he had and perhaps create more. Hines nodded, fully supporting their leader's plan, and Tanka said, "Before the heroes find us again." "Well, sir, there is not much money left," Hines said. "What we have is what Shinju was able to grab before that endeavor blew up the building," and Tanka winced. He thanked the brave man for having the guts to at least grab one of the 14 bags of money, even though Tanka would have preferred that Shinju had grabbed the briefcase that contained the serum. However, money was necessary for them to stay alive, and for some reason, calories were needed after reverting from a zoanoid to a human. It appeared that when one of them transformed into their altered state, it burned a lot of calories, and when they were once again human, they were extremely hungry. The problem they faced was that the one bag Shinju had taken only contained about $240,000, which would only last them roughly 3.5 months at the rate he and the others consumed food. "Take Myers, and keep searching for Shigaraki. If we want to be successful, we must locate him. Tell everyone to stop reverting unless absolutely necessary," Tanka ordered, and Hines waved to Myers. The two mercenaries that were the last of his original crew departed, and Tanka was faced with the fact that Hines could not even get him another playmate, which would really frustrate him. He thoroughly enjoyed playing with that other girl. It took his mind and hormones off Momo Yaoyorozu. Now all he could think about was soon he would want to play with her. Those thoughts could distract him from what he needed to accomplish. So he needed a playmate, so that meant sending out one or two of the others to locate one for him. "Shinju, Toshi," he said to the two, "I have a job for you." They appeared to get excited as they approached him from the other side of the large station, and they both nodded in agreement. On their way out, Shinju picked up a bottle of chloroform and a rag. Outside the abandoned subway station, Himiko Toga was like the rest of her crew from the Vanguard Action Squad, searching for Tanka, though the blonde girl believed it was a waste of time. She wanted to pursue a certain green-haired boy that had caught her fancy. Those that did catch her attention generally did not live long enough afterwards for her to really get to know. It was the price of her being attracted to them. Leaning against a cement wall of an alley, she toyed with her knife, feeling bored and impatient. Then she saw two men leave the station, and she knew instantly that the two did not fit into that area. They were not bums or street people. For one, they both were clean. Reaching for her phone to contact Dabi, she felt someone grab and pin her arms, while another covered her mouth with a rag. Struggling, she inhaled and then realized that the rag was coated with some type of chemical. Feeling lightheaded, Himiko could not keep her eyes open as she lost consciousness and passed out. Barely hearing, "Well, she is not exactly what the boss wants, then I am not into young girls like he is," one said, and that was all she heard as darkness overcame her. Awakening, Himiko felt groggy and her head hurt. When she tried to reach with her hand to rub her eyes, she found that she couldn't. Opening her gritty eyes, she peered over and noticed that both of her wrists were tied to some type of metal bedposts. She then noticed some other things, such as her ankles were also tied, and what really annoyed her was she was completely naked. Someone had removed all of her clothes, including her underwear. Pulling at the restraints, she grumbled, unable to voice her discomfort because she had been gagged. Surveying the room as best she could, she exhaled sharply through her nose. Inhaling, she caught the smell of a foul odor. The room was barely light and the walls were completely bare. She could see in front of her one metal door. To the left she could make out a smaller room, which from the dripping sounds she guessed was perhaps a bathroom. When the door began to creak open, she glared angrily. All in all, she wanted to kill someone for this indignity. A man entered and Himiko knew exactly who it was. Tanka. "Well, Shinju, she is not what I asked for, but she will do for the time being," Tanka said to his right, and she heard the man that had spoken before. Tanka grinned when Shinju said, "Boss, she was hanging around outside, and you told us not to draw too much attention." Himiko wanted to scream at him and threatened to gut him like a fish, but the gag prevented her from speaking, and all she could hear were her own groaning noises. "Her body is nice enough, but I'm not a huge fan of blondes." Tanka shut the door after admiring the young blonde girl, touching her ankle and putting his hand upwards. Himiko thrashed at his touch and gave him the most hateful look she could manage. "Yes, you will definitely be an adequate diversion," he said. Toga Himiko. Yes, I am fully aware of your identity and your connection to Tamura Shigaraki. He grinned and started removing his clothes before lying down beside her. A few hours later, he finished, and Himiko had bitten the gag so forcefully that she was afraid she might have broken a few teeth, but it didn't matter to her because all she could think about at the moment was killing Tanka in the most agonizing way possible. He grinned at her and said, "That was quite good and you really satisfied me." She felt an odd weight on her right ankle and looked down to see an ankle cuff fastened to a long chain that was hooked to the wall. "Now I am going to cut those ropes off your wrists and ankles. After that, take off your gag. There is a bathtub in that small space, and the water is functional. We'll talk briefly after you take a bath." After that, he cut the ropes and took off her gag, rewarming her mouth with moisture and shifting it around to ease the pain. Tanka laughed and Himiko wheezed out, I am going to kill you," she whispered, still trying to clear her mouth of the soreness and stiffness. "I swear I am going to kill you for what you have done." He made his way to the door. "My young Himiko, I don't think so. I highly doubt it. Now go take a bath," Tanka said, and went out. She sat for a few minutes, glaring at the locked and closed door, wishing she had her knife so she could make the man pay for what he had done to her. After a few minutes, she stood up and glared down at the 3 used condoms on the floor, feeling angry as she tried not to remember him using them. She dragged the chain behind her and went into the bathroom, hoping that by taking a bath, she would be able to erase the memory of what he had done to her. "Neither is possible. I'm sure that Sicko would prefer that I be one of them. In order for him to screw both of them. In any case, I suppose I am basically fucked." Himiko snarled and then reclined in the cool water, unable to hope that any of her squad teammates would discover her because she had left alone and they had no idea where she was, leaving her here for Tanka to use until he grew tired of her, at which point she realized he would probably kill her. The Gathering. Saturday. Momo clung to her Izuku's Guyver armored form high above the buildings, and she loved it. It felt amazing as he carried her high into the air, and she wished they could do this more often. However, the school forbade him from flying anywhere other than over the campus grounds while he was a student, and he was only allowed to fly 50 feet or less, so it was not worth it, at least not for her to accompany him. Now that he was a part-time sidekick, he was able to fly her everywhere, and it was fantastic. A few minutes later, Momo was a little let down that the trip had not been longer. "Can we take a side trip on the way back? Maybe travel several hundred miles to a small town and have lunch there?" Izuku, who turned off the armor, shrugged when she asked. "Of course, why not?" Izuku said, "I doubt Tanka would be able to cause any problems if we are that far from the city." Momo grinned in response, and as soon as the balcony doors were opened, Takiyama, also known as Mount Lady, who was not wearing her uniform but rather regular clothes, welcomed the two. "Hello, Momo Yaoyorozu must be you. I've heard a lot about you from Midoriya." Izuku was a little hesitant to leave, but since Night Eye had arrived, he might as well follow her advice. "Oh, Night Eye is here, Midoriya, why don't you go and get your lecture over for this week?" Takiyama said, pointing to a door to the right. "That will give me and Momo here a chance to talk." Takiyama grinned at Momo as she left them. The other shook her head. "Good, you can refer to me as Taki or Takiyama. Both are acceptable. Come, I've prepared tea in the adjacent room." Following the attractive blonde into the room, Momo sat down and said, "Now Izuku there has told me about your concerns and I feel that I better assure you that I have no intention of doing anything inappropriate with him." She then produced a stack of magazines that were all about her. "Well, based on the magazines you have there, I'm a little concerned." Momo sipped her tea and tried not to blame Takiyama for what the magazines said she was like. "I mean those articles," she said. "Oh, those. All of those are absolutely loads, I can assure you. Total nonsense. It's a farce and a faux section aid. I'm not like that at all. Yes, I like to act like a typical blonde idiot and I am flirtatious. It's all an act, though. People expect me to be that way based on how I look, especially men." Momo could almost identify with Takiyama's statement, "Because I am blonde, have a nice ass, killer breasts, and an awesome body. Men have been staring at her since she blossomed, and she even had a psychopathic pervert who was obsessed with her." Takiyama chuckled as Momo pointed to the stack and said, "But the magazines. If that is the matter that worries you, let us discuss and compare this one, then," Takiyama said as she removed the bottom magazine from the pile and Momo winced. It was a recent teen magazine. On the cover was her and Izuku and it was titled, Cutest Teen Couple. The two on the cover were holding hands and smiling at each other. Takiyama flipped to the article inside and Momo could see some highlighted entries. Now according to this and I quote, Momo Yaoyorozu, also known as Kriti, and Izuku Midoriya, also known as the Guyver, are in a committed relationship. She grinned at Momo and said, now, it's thought that the two, despite their obvious affection, are not engaging in physical intimacy. I remember being a teenager not too long ago, and I find it difficult to accept that you two are not, well, based on what I've been told by the UA administration. That's a bit unrealistic, Momo said, gasping and looking at Takiyama in disbelief. Momo stumbled, wait, the school believes me and Izuku are. Takiyama laughed, wondering how the school would even know. They have suspicions, are unsure, and do not wish to find out. Thus, unwind. Simply put, the magazine writers want to present a particular morality that will establish you two as role models. To date, how much fan mail have you received? Takiyama inquired, and Momo let out a sharp sigh. A good deal, Momo said, frowning slightly. Izuku actually gets more and those are from a lot of teenage girls. It was true that Izuku's fan mail was filled with love letters and requests for him to get in touch with them. She thought it was bad enough that at least 2/3 of the girls at UA had feelings for her boyfriend, but it was getting to her that more than a couple thousand were also interested in him. I wager, are you still worried that I might act inappropriately toward Izuku? When Takiyama questioned, Momo bit her lower lip. Not as much as in the past. Takiyama laughed once more as Momo answered, but still, I love him and I do not want someone trying to take him away from me. Enough. In actuality, a small amount of jealousy is healthy. Keeps you on your toes, Takiyama said, drawing out a pen. Is there any chance you could sign this? Momo laughed when she said, my younger sister is a huge fan of you too. There were at least a dozen pictures of her and Izuku together, and the majority of them showed a teenage couple out having fun. When Izuku returned, he signed himself, and the two said their goodbyes for the time being before leaving. Izuku then flew Momo to a small town where they enjoyed a nice, quiet lunch together. At the Hero Training Center practice facility, Izuku carried Takiyama in her disguise as MT Lady while she was flying about 50 feet above the ground. When she nodded, he dropped her, and she instantly started to grow and landed at full size a second later. She grinned at him as he circled her now enormous head, saying, good. Takiyama remarked, that is actually perfect, before turning to face the two observers Night-Eye and a Hero Administration mid-level officer. She's correct. The other nodded in agreement. That was perfect, Night-Eye said, admiring the thought of Izuku flying Mount Lady in his Guyver form. With his eyes fixed on Takiyama's amazing body, the officer said, yes, now she can arrive in an adequate amount of time without worrying about collateral damage to buildings. Takiyama shrank in size, and Izuku landed a few feet away from them all. The officer then blinked and turned to face Izuku, saying, but you will need to adhere to the restrictions that were issued. There will be no confrontations between you and any villain. The man said firmly, unless you are threatened or some innocent bystander. I understand after reading them. Izuku, who didn't particularly agree with the notion that after he arrived and essentially dropped Takiyama off, he would just stand by and do nothing while she faced down whatever villains were wreaking havoc, stated, at most, I do crowd control and ensure that no bystanders are harmed. Exactly. Izuku deactivated the Guyver after the man left, complaining a little that he was just a glorified taxi. Takiyama and Night-Eye laughed. Now I need to report this to the Hero Administration that this will work. This is how it must be, Izuku Midoriya, despite the fact that you are a probationary hero. Izuku let out a sharp sigh as Night-Eye clarified, you are still considered a student, and the Hero Administration does not want you to put yourself in any dangerous situations. All right, do you want to take an Uber or do you want me to fly you back to the agency? Izuku asked with a faint smile, and Takiyama laughed. He picked her up from under her armpits and activated the Guyver again, and as he flew back to the city, he felt a strange sensation that seemed to send a chill down his spine. He turned to face the sensation and said, Takey, there is something over that way, it is hard to explain, but we need to go there. She nodded in agreement. With curiosity about why Izuku was flying toward Mount Fuji, Takiyama said, well, you are my ride, so go ahead. An hour later, they landed at the base of the volcano, and Izuku approached a volcanic crack. He was drawn to something inside, but he didn't know what it was. Takiyama followed him as he eased inside. Do you know what brought you here? Izuku shook his armored head in response to her question, but he answered her after realizing she couldn't see him do so. I have no idea, other than, I do not know, there is something here. Izuku replied, and after several minutes of easing around huge boulders and crevices, they reached a chamber. Steam was flowing from one side and it was extremely hot. Izuku did not feel the heat, but Takiyama did. Nearing the far wall, he placed his hand against it. The feelings intensified. Behind here, as Takiyama, drenched in perspiration from the heat, wiped her forehead with her sleeve, struggling to breathe, he whispered, behind this rock. She estimated that the temperature in the cavern was at least 120 degrees. Whatever it is, we must act quickly. I am being cooked alive in here, Takiyama said, hoping that this was not a wild goose chase or something along those lines. Sweat was now almost pouring off her and she knew she had to leave soon. Izuku reared back and slammed his fist into the stone. It crumbled and he tore away a large section of rock, and Takiyama stared in shock. Behind the rock was something smooth, and from what she could tell it was not natural. What the? It was at least 40 degrees cooler inside. Izuku, are you sure about this? She asked, and Izuku put his hand on the multicolored surface. The strange material seemed to constrict in on itself, and an opening appeared. She followed him and let out a sigh of relief as Izuku entered. This sounds a little bit familiar. There were what Takiyama thought were doors here and there, but she stopped him by putting her hand on his armored forearm. No, I have not been here before, though I think this is, wait, I know what this is, Izuku said exuberantly as he started to move forward into a long, winding hallway. You claim to know what this is, but what is it? What is it, then? Izuku turned around and gestured with his right hand upwards as Takiyama asked impatiently. One of the aliens, ships is this one. Izuku told her, this one. I think they left it behind for some reason, and she gave him a wide-eyed look. He then went on, determined to discover what it was, and when he put his hand on another door, it opened, revealing a completely empty room. Izuku paused and waited as he stepped into the middle of the room, and suddenly a long aperture flowed from the ceiling and connected to the Guyver eye. Izuku. Takiyama raised his left hand in her direction and yelled, ready to leap forward and tear whatever it was off her sidekick. Everything is fine, Izuku said softly, this is normal, and then he stood there as energy started to pour into him from the hose. It is recharging me, or rather the Guyver unit, he told her, and he stood motionless for a few minutes as the alien device poured energy into him. Okay, this is weird. I can hear the ship talking to me. Takiyama moved closer. What does it say? Takiyama inquired, and Izuku chuckled briefly. Izuku accepted the upgrade and said, it is asking if I want to upgrade this Guyver unit into a warrior unit. Suddenly, parts of the walls opened, and pieces of different sizes started to attach themselves to Izuku. Takiyama thought the additions seemed to mold to the Guyver armor, adding thickness in some places and bulk in others. When it was finished, she could swear the armor looked even more menacing. The aperture detached, and Izuku turned to face her. All right, based on what it told me, I am fully recharged and all upgrades are completed. Oh no, we must depart immediately. As he hurried her back down the corridor, he said, I realize I ask a lot. However, what is happening? Takiyama remarked as he appeared to rush her down the corridor. A weird rumbling started to reverberate throughout the alien ship. Once outside and back in the sweltering heat, she looked at him, curious as to why they were in such a hurry. Before she could ask, he informed her, and they started to head back to the entrance. It is returning home. This is the only reason it stayed, and now it's going. We must leave this place quickly. Izuku gave the order to plow through the crack, widening it with relative ease. She followed him, tempted to use her quirk to help smash their way out, but he was moving so fast that she didn't have to. Once outside, he picked her up and streaked away, then seemed to raise itself upwards as the alien ship broke free, flashing pure light and then rocketing straight up so fast that it looked like a blur of color. Takiyama exhaled and glanced at the more impressive Guyver armor. You were writing the report on this when we return. Anyone ever tell you that being associated with you is, well, it is not boring? Takiyama said, shaking her head and looking up at the area where the alien ship had disappeared. Return me to the agency. I need an aspirin, she said, without mentioning that she also desired a shower and a stiff drink. The lair, rising from her now daily routine of having Tanka come and lay on top of her, Himiko Toga exhaled and headed for the bathroom. once more to wash herself and then wait for one of Taranka's cronies to bring her mid-morning meal. It was now a routine. Taranka would come in 2 or 3 times a day, do her and then after she bathed. Someone would bring her food and if she asked juice. It bothered her that she had been here almost a week and still he had not asked her about Tamura Shigaraki. At this point she would be willing to tell the asshole exactly where Tamura was hiding. Just to stop him from. She hated it with all her soul. Vowing that someday she would take great pleasure in cutting Taranka into little pieces. As she had done to her stepfather back when she was 12. Her stepfather did the same thing to her that Taranka was doing and it made her insane with desire to plunge her knife deep within him. She remembered how good it felt to stab her stepfather repeatedly, right after he had came into her room that night and laid on top of her. While he rested, she removed the butcher knife from under pillow and spent a good 20 minutes stabbing him over and over again. The blood splattered the walls in her. She then drank his blood and transformed into him, leaving the house to never return. In the morning her mother had discovered her dead husband and Himiko was long gone. She wanted to do the same to Taranka, but decided first she would cut off his lower appendage. Then slaughter him. Rising from the now water in the tube, she toweled herself off and went back to the small bedroom to await her food. After Heinz gave the little slut her food, he closed the door and sought out Taranka. "Sir, I don't understand." Taranka grinned as Heinz remarked, "I thought you were going to ask that girl where Tamura Shigaraki was hiding. You don't comprehend people like Himiko Toga, my friend. She is a crazy psychopath who loves to kill and torture anyone who catches her eye. I think that once I've given her enough of my tender touches, she'll tell me the location without any trouble." Taranka chuckled, looking at the metal door that held his distraction. "Now, we must keep going as we are. If you stay in the shadows, maybe Tamura will make a mistake. We're done making any from now on." He scowled. He had made a number of mistakes, allowing his heightened aggressive and zoanoid tendencies to override his intelligence and common sense. He won't do that again. Test in the field. Takiyama and Night Eye decided to test to see what the upgrades had done for Izuku and the Guyver on the same day that the alien ship gave him an upgrade and made the report to the Hero Administration. He stepped onto the training grounds and began to see what he had changed, and he discovered that he was stronger than before, along with everything else. The laser beam easily pierced a metal plate, whereas previously it hardly tarnished the metal. When he snapped out his blades, he discovered that he now had 2 blades on each forearm. He began to wonder what the chest blast would do, and whether it would be too powerful or destructive. Off to one side Takiyama watched with Night Eye. Night Eye shook his head after watching, and she whispered to the other. At this point, he might be nearly as powerful as All Might. Does it continue to travel to the back of his neck even after he deactivates that device? Night Eye inquired, and Takiyama gave a nod. As they watched Izuku effortlessly lift a massive boulder that they estimated weighed between 20 and 30 tons, Takiyama responded, "Yes, and it still doesn't do anything to him." "Actually I think he might be as strong or maybe even stronger," Takiyama said. "It's difficult to tell how strong he is now because of the alien upgrades," she said, and Night Eye had to concur. The fact that there was an alien ship beneath Mount Fuji has left the Hero Administration leaders stunned. Night Eye told her, "They're wondering if there might be others tucked away somewhere." Takiyama also wondered, and they casually walked over to them. "There isn't, as far as I know." As Izuku turned off the armor, the thicker, larger pieces appeared to compress and then inject themselves in the back of his neck, instantly vanishing. "Oh, it seems that the upgrades gave me increased hearing and sight as well," he said. "I think I am done for the day." He hadn't told Momo yet, and he didn't want her to hear it from someone else. He didn't want her to be angry with him for any reason, so he had better return to the dorms and tell her about it. "Then, see you tomorrow." Izuku accepted Night Eye's advice, saying, "I think we need to do some more tests on this and determine just how strong and powerful you are now." It made sense, and he reactivated the Guyver, leaping into the air and taking off faster than before. This was another improvement, as he chose to simply show Momo rather than attempt to explain what had happened. "The League of Villains. Are you certain that Himiko Toga hasn't contacted any of you?" Dr. Compress shrugged his shoulders and Dabi asked, glancing over to the closed door where Kurogiri and Tamura Shigaraki were waiting. "A week without a word. She tends to do that," Spinner said, working on his new swords after losing his last multi-sword weapon when it intercepted the Guyver's indestructible blades. "Perhaps she is out, having fun." The only person who appeared to be concerned about her disappearance was Dabi, and Spinner had a suspicion that the scarred man had a serious crush on the psychopathic blonde. "She is not the most stable person around, you know," he said, grinning wryly. Her presence was anticipated. When the door opened, the others appeared to melt back, leaving Dabi to answer to Tamura Shigaraki. Tamura exhaled sharply, looked around, and then sighed. "Tamura has a job for her that involves impersonating someone," Dabi said, worried that Tamura would somehow blame him for Himiko's failure to arrive as instructed. "Where is she now?" With a sly smile, Tamura said, "I need her to run a quick errand for me. We have the blood, and we know when the hero provisional license exams are. She is all we need to replace the girls. So, once more, where is she?" Dabi flinched as he demanded. "We don't know. We were looking for that jackass you wanted us to find when I last saw her. Himiko left to find something more enjoyable to do on her own." Tamura began frantically scratching at his neck after Dabi informed their leader that it had been roughly a week. "You fools." As soon as Tamura realized that the people still in the vanguard might not be as capable as he had thought, he said, "Do you think that perhaps since there are no news reports of any grisly murders that perhaps something has happened to her? Perhaps it was because Muscular and Mustard were in prison, or perhaps it was because none of them were fully committed to the League of Villains, and they didn't really care if one of them was captured, killed, or went missing. Do you think we should go find her?" Tamura scowled at the green lizard man as Spinner posed the question. "Now that you can't find Tanka, how are you going to find Himiko Toga?" Kurogiri slammed the door behind the counter and turned back to the room Tamura had just left. "Go ahead and search, and if you are lucky enough to stumble upon her, then perhaps you might prove that you are not as incompetent as I suspect. It seems to me that she might have been captured by Tanka." Kurogiri said, "You do realize, Tamura, that she knows about this location," and Tamura took off his hand mask. "That could be advantageous to us. Consider this, my friend. Tanka and his gang of monsters have not been found. We can rely on Himiko to eventually let Tanka know where we are." Kurogiri laughed as Tamura said, "Then we can make plans for his arrival." At last, Kurogiri realized, "We can set a trap." Tamura grinned with pleasure. Tamura said, "Yes, we can." He then started outlining his plan for the trap, which was to finally put an end to Tanka and his monsters. The dorms at Ua. Izuku turned on the Guyver and turned to face his girlfriend outside and behind the dorms. Momo approached and tentatively touched the armor, saying, "When it goes in and out of you. Is it painful?" Momo made a worried remark, "It looks bulkier than the original," and Izuku turned off the armor once more. "No, it feels exactly the same. I no longer even sense it." Momo put her right hand on Izuku's chest, grinned, and shook her head. "Not like the beginning where it felt strange having something eject from the back of my neck and then return the same way," Izuku said. "I'm sorry the alien ship left. Cynthia would have cherished looking at it." Izuku shrugged and Momo said, "Maybe find other units or learn how these things work. As soon as it gave me the upgrades and recharged me, it departed." Izuku stated, "The recharging is good for another 10,000 years or so, from what it told me," and Momo escorted him to a bench nearby. "According to what you told me, these upgrades have so far improved your strength, power, and pretty much everything else. Why, I wonder?" Momo questioned. "I mean, the original Guyver was already impressive," and Izuku shrugged once more. "I have no idea. Perhaps it is related to Tanka and the zoanoids." Izuku responded, "It really did not tell me a reason, other than it was here to recharge me and conduct the upgrades if I wanted them. Fortunately, they were not concerned about a photographer surreptitiously taking pictures of them being affectionate on the UA campus, and they were unaware that they had been photographed or that the pictures were featured in a teen magazine. It was extremely embarrassing to learn of the photos and the magazine article, and even now, nearly a month after the magazine's release, they both receive a ton of fan mail, which seems to grow every day." Momo sat with Izuku for another hour before leading him inside, leading him straight to the dayroom. The lair. When the door creaked open, Himiko, who had been sleeping for a little while, woke up. She knew who it was and what he wanted to do, so she spread her legs and waited for him to lay down on her so that it could be over with. When Tanka hadn't done so yet, she opened her eyes and looked up at him, saying, "Just get it over with already." Tanka grinned. Tanka said, "I thought we might have a little talk instead." Himiko sat up and leaned back against the cold wall, worried because she thought he had screwed her for at least 2 weeks, and now he seemed uninterested, which could only mean that he planned to kill her or, as he had hinted, give her to the others to play with. She did enjoy the thought of the 9 or so others lying on top of her, doing her repeatedly and sequentially, one after another, and so on. Tanka was already bad enough. Being gangbanged was not something she could handle. I assume you're curious about Tamura Shigaraki's whereabouts. Himiko said. Well, if you hadn't kept pushing yourself on me, I might have told you. She still wished she had her knife, and she was so intent on killing Tanka that she didn't care if she lived or died as long as she could do it. He laughed. Tanka casually glanced at the metal door and said, oh, but if you don't tell me, it could get so unpleasant for you. This is what will happen, my dear Himiko Toga, she said with a menacing smile. I'll have Hines come in and do you after I've done you. Then the others, and then I'll let you go. Immediately drop you off in front of the local police station. Just like you were at the moment. Naked, he said, and Himiko shuddered. She was not yet 18, but there was still an active warrant for her arrest for the multiple murders she had committed, and she bet that the judge would sentence her to death once she was charged. She let out a sharp breath and lowered her gaze. All right, you jerk. Himiko replied, then gave him the precise location of Tamura Shigaraki. Tanka smiled mischievously and ran his right hand up her inner thigh. Himiko swallowed hard as Tanka said, that is a good girl. Now lie back down. I never said I would not want to play a bit with you. She knew what he wanted, but she couldn't stop him. He was unaware that she was nearly finished with a project she had been working on for many hours, and that it was now securely concealed beneath the bathtub. While looking around the room, she discovered a 10-inch piece of metal. After grating it against the cast iron tub for hours, it was flat. It was nearly sharp enough for her to get even. She would have a knife in a day or two. She just needed to put up with him long enough. She felt him shift between her legs and on top of her, and she grimaced. She focused on the satisfying idea of driving the homemade knife home to his heart. The dayroom. Momo leaned heavily against him and fell asleep lightly. With her arms firmly wrapped around Izuku, she had fallen asleep after watching the movie Avatar on the DVD player for an hour. Momo was happy for a moment when he put his own arms around her. Since she could only see and spend time with him in the mornings during their classes, she truly detested the fact that he was now only a part-time student. Later in the day, after he had finished at the mountain agency. Even though they had the weekends, she didn't think that was enough. The fact that they might eventually not even have that was what worried her the most. Their sexual lives were already impacted. She has now been denied the opportunity to spend the night with him twice, which has greatly displeased her. If Izuku was too busy or exhausted to be intimate, she enjoyed having sex with him. She was really irritated by that. Following the conclusion of the film, the credits started to appear on the screen. Momo opened her eyes and stirred. He had also fallen asleep when she gave him a gentle prod. He grinned at her after opening his eyes. She exhaled sharply, let him go slowly, and stood up. She took his hand and walked him up to her room, saying, "Come on. I want to spend the night with you in my room," committed to maintaining their sexual life. Tanka and his zoanoids were starting to make sense. They now knew the precise location of the League of Villains, leader, Tamura Shigaraki. Under threat of being with each of Tanka's friends one after the other, Himiko Toga had told him. He grinned as he turned to face the metal door. She was sane enough not to want man after man to repeatedly do her, even though she looked and behaved like a psychopath. One of the others had turned on the television while he and Hines were organizing the attack on Shigaraki. Then something on it terrified them all to their core. Tanka found the feeling odd, as if it were coursing through him in waves. Like Hines and the others, he walked over to the television and stared at the screen. The new and enhanced Sidekick hero was the topic of the news reporter's conversation. Also known as the Guyver, Izuku Midoriya. His group all took sharp breaths, gazing at the screen and the bigger armored teen. Fear. As he gazed at the alien armor, he felt a surge of primal fear. The others nodded as Tanka muttered, "Why do I suddenly feel afraid? Like I want to run and hide." Feeling the same way, Hines snapped his fingers after blinking a few times. "I think I know why, sir. It is like he is now an apex predator. When I was in Africa, animals would go ballistic when they saw, smelled or heard an apex predator like a lion was about. I think that is what we are all feeling right now. That thing is now just like that, an apex predator that is making our zoanoid forms experience the same fear. I bet if we change it will grow more intense." Hines clarified and Tanka audibly gasped. I wholeheartedly concurred with Hines's statement. One of the others said, So what do we do? And Taranka turned to face him. Taranka looked back at the metal door where Himiko Toga was being held and said, well for now Grains we do what we plan to do. Take out Tamura Shigaraki and take over the League of Villains. He looked at Hines, who was a little perplexed, and said, Chong, you stay behind when we go. Pack our shit and join us when you are done. Oh, and if you want, you can play with Himiko a bit before you leave her behind. What once I am in charge of the league, then I will have the resources to concentrate on acquiring Momo Yaoyorozu. I do not need the complication of having that slut along, and I do not believe she will be an acceptable addition to our group. He clarified, and Chong laughed. As the others gave him jealous looks, Chong continued to smile and said, thank you sir. The blonde with the crazy smile and the frilly hair was someone they wanted to play with. Taranka was very good and enjoyable to play with, based on their observations. Taranka went to the door and bid Himiko farewell while the others prepared. Deciding not to partake in her pleasures once more, Chong walked confidently to the door and unlocked it 10 minutes after the others had left. He had a strong desire to have Himiko at least once after seeing her nude multiple times. He smiled sadistically at the blonde girl and she returned the smile, saying, you and I are going to have some real fun. Taranka was too gentle with you. As for me, I believe that if you do not cry then it is not that good. Himiko had listened to the entire conversation inside the room and was aware that Taranka would return if she wanted to speak with her again. Today would be his last day on Earth. Now her homemade knife was sufficiently sharp. Under her pillow, it was carefully hidden. After filing away a link in the chain with another piece of metal, she might be left free in an additional hour. However, she first felt compelled to kill Taranka for repeatedly imposing himself on her. As someone else opened the door and said something absurd about the six being bad if she didn't cry, she whispered, a penance has to be paid. No matter what anyone did to her, she would never cry. She recognized Chong as the man, who crept into the room and started undressing. She waited for him to get closer while grinning at him. Before she ended him, Himiko was even prepared to have him start by lying on top of her. As he spread her legs and sat on top of her, she moved her right hand beneath the pillow and clasped the knife handle. To avoid making any noise, she bit her lower lip, as she had done each time Taranka touched her. Chong started to move, and before he could respond, she took out the knife and gave the man's chest a forceful stab wound. Directly into his heart, she growled, yanking out the blade and rolling him over as he struggled to stop the blood gushing from his chest. That is what you get, asshole, she snarled. She raised the knife with both hands and repeatedly stabbed him while straddling him. I wished it had been Taranka. She looked down at the now dead man and laughed as her arms started to shake from exhaustion. She got off of him and began grinding at the weak chain link she had been working on, taking the metal out from under the mattress. 2 more hours passed before she was able to leave the cramped room and free herself. She seized Chang's garments. She put them on so she wouldn't be completely nude when she went outside. Too much attention would be drawn to that. Just as she had killed Chong, she was determined to kill Taranka. The UA dorms. Izuku got up immediately and began to dress. Momo crossed her arms in front of her bed, sat up, and leaned back against the wall to watch him. You know this really sucks. When you leave right after we have sex, it sort of makes me feel like I am a prostitute. All that is left is for to put money on my dresser, then I would be one. She was grinning. Momo continued to grimace as Izuku said, I am sorry, M. You know we cannot risk Iwaza catching me when he does his hallway checks or room checks. Since Iwaza was unable to check a girl's room, he occasionally patrolled the hallways. Izuku and Momo spent some time together in her room before Iwaza checked on her. After leaving her, he would return covertly to his room. Momo protested and then let out a sharp exhale, saying, like I said, this sucks. He is so determined to enforce those stupid rules that he is making the dorms feel more like a prison. As he finished putting on his t-shirt, Izuku remarked, well, what can we do? Thankfully Takiyama is not as strict or we could not even spend time together in your room. All set to slip from her room to his own. He leaned in and gave her a quick kiss. I love you and I wish things were different. But I doubt that Iwaza will stop enforcing those rules. Not since he caught Kachan coming out of Ochako Uraraka's room and then threatened to punish severely if he catches anyone else breaking the rules. Momo raised her eyebrows. Both Katsuki Bakugo and Ochako Uraraka fell asleep after studying late into the night, but they did nothing else. Ochako was on her bed and Katsuki was on the floor. Iwaza still overreacted, punished them, and then became extremely strict after they told him about it. I am going to talk to Principal Nezu about this. Since we were basically forced to live on the UA campus, we should have some rights of privacy. Momo fumed. She's had enough. In the dayroom, she and Izuku were unable to sit close to one another for fear of Iwaza entering and ordering them to keep a minimum of 10 inches between them. Additionally, he prohibited physical contact of any kind both inside and outside the dorms. Overall, Iwaza was acting like a total anal dick. Izuku said, "If you want, I will go with you." Momo grinned. Then gave a headshake. Momo motioned for him to stoop closer and said, "No, this is my thing. I already have an idea of what I am going to say while I argue against this whole situation," giving him a kiss. She watched him go so he could slip back to his room before the room check, whispering, "I did not forget, by the way. I love you too, Izzy." She went over to her cell phone, grabbed it, and texted Principal Nezu to ask to meet. The press conference. Takiyama Yu, also known as Mount Lady, was waiting when Izuku landed on the balcony of the mountain agency for the second time. As he went inside and turned off the geyser, the blonde heroine said, "I have some good news and some bad news for you. The good news is Night Eye will not be coming today to lecture you. The bad news is that the Hero Administration wants you to do a press conference," she stated, and Izuku sighed. Frustrated, Izuku questioned, "Do I have to?" Being fully aware of the Hero Administration's motivation for obtaining one, the Hero Administration wanted to introduce the public to the new and enhanced alien armored hero in light of the geyser's recent upgrades. Takiyama grinned. With her hair slightly fluffed up and her makeup just the way she wanted it, Takiyama said, "Yes, you have to. Do not worry, I will be there and a Hero Administration liaison officer will also be there to do most of the talking. At most all you have to do is stand there and let the camera people take pictures and film you. That is all. Now cheer up, it is not as bad as you might think," merely to ensure that she looked flawless. She needed to continue projecting an attractive blonde persona that would appeal to men. When Izuku arrived, he was met with a barrage of questions, the most important of which was whether or not he would be promoted to hero status. Fortunately, none of them could see how embarrassed he was in his geyser form. The liaison officer and that stepped in right away. Takiyama had been correct, he only needed to stand there. He was allowed to return to the agency an hour later, and after putting Takiyama down, he turned back to himself. He blurted out, "That sucked." Takiyama chuckled. "Oh come on, it was not that bad. You know, my first press conference I was asked a whole slew of embarrassing questions. The worst was some reporter asked me if it was true that I was going to pose naked in Playboy." Izuku responded with a grin. Takiyama winced a little as Izuku said, "You know, two of my classmates, Mineta Minoru and Dank Kaminari, probably would not mind that." Takayama remembered the short pervert Mineta Minoru when she hired him as an intern. She felt completely subconscious about having him around because he was always staring at her. "Oh him," Takayama exclaimed coldly, shook her head. "If Mineta Minoru does not learn to control his perverse nature, then he will never find an agency that will accept him." "I know I never will," she said with a grin. "Oh, I almost forgot. With the upgrade, the higher-ups in the Hero Administration wants to know just how more powerful your chest blast might be. They are setting up a place for you to demonstrate it, and it should be ready by the end of the week. Personally, I would not mind knowing that too," she stated, and Izuku could sympathize. He wouldn't mind finding out how much more it had gone up. He had many suspicions. Momo was en route to her meeting with Principal Nezu when he got her text. He replied to her text by wishing her luck. The villains, League. Tamura Shigaraki set the trap by putting his own mannequin in the primary room. He chuckled at the resemblance as it was dressed to look just like him. He was eager to put an end to the threat that Tanka and his supporters posed to both the League and himself. Kurogiri had brought together some of the most powerful and formidable members of the League. The Vanguard Action Squad is among them. They were all told by Tamura to hold off on attacking until Tanka entered the room. To accept no survivors. He himself wished he could see Tanka fall apart in his hands. He wouldn't mind if one of the others defeated him first, though, after witnessing what the monsters were capable of. Actually, he would rather be somewhere else and not be involved in the altercation than be there at all. He was worried that he might get hurt, but he also understood that he was too crucial to the League to be put in danger. However, he had to be there because Tanka posed a threat to his authority as leader. Hines went to where he was to enter the building from outside. Out of Taranka's and the other's line of sight. The blood samples that Taranka had requested were in the bag he was carrying. The egotistical moron thought that they would eventually be able to reverse engineer the Zoanoid serum using some kind of biochemistry. Hines, however, was aware that Taranka had no chance of achieving that. However, he was aware of a business that could. Years before, when they tested a mutagen on a small Sudanese village, he had been employed by that company. After the mutagen essentially killed everyone in the village, he and the other mercenaries were assigned to clean up, which entailed destroying and burning the infected people's bodies. The Zodiac Corporation could readily reverse engineer the Zoanoid serum from the blood samples because they had the necessary resources and technology. Hines was on the verge of being set for life after some minor haggling with the CEO. Watching Taranka and the others enter the building, Hines grinned slightly. He whispered, "Goodbye, you idiots." Taranka roared as he and the other 7 entered the building and transformed into their Zoanoid forms. Taranka snarled, "Now remember, no one but me kills Tamura Shigaraki," and ripped the inner door from its hinges. He felt a heightened fear that he had to suppress, but it was not of Tamura. No, it came from the new and improved Guyver's knowledge that was in the city. Taranka was aware that the others shared the same ingrained anxiety about the Guyver's arrival. To prevent himself from being overcome by fear, he told himself, he is not coming. He is on the other side of the city. He strode to the next door in the hallway, tore it off its hinges once more, and saw Tamura inside. Taranka roared, "Time to die," and swung his absurd outfit at the young man who stood there. With a roar of delight, he grabbed the figure and ripped Tamura to pieces. Holding the 2 halves above his head, he roared once more, reveling in the moment. Quite loudly. Then I saw there was no gore or blood, simply stuffing. Myers snarled and looked around with his large, dark eyes, saying, "It is a trap." He said it again, "You led us into a trap." Shinju screamed in agony. As he was consumed by blue flames, he illuminated the dark room. Shinju staggered around, attempting to put out the excruciating flames that were killing him. He screamed repeatedly as he slammed into a wall. He stopped screaming as the flames consumed him. Taranka realized that he had made a mistake again and growled anxiously, "Retreat. We need to get out of here. Now." When one of his allies appeared to vanish before his very eyes. Before he heard a crunching sound beneath his clawed foot, he had no idea what had happened to him. "Oops, it looks like you just crushed your friend." A cool voice spoke from the darkness. One of the others slashed at the voice with his clawed hand after the voice laughed and said, "Well, it tends to happen once I compress someone to the size of a marble. I'm really missing him." As Taranka and his Zoanoids hurried to the exit, others started to fall. A Nomu confronted one and stabbed the Zoanoid beast with a massive drill after another erupted into blue flames. A huge hole was ripped in the man's chest. Before one of the others could strike back, the Nomu essentially disintegrated. 10 meters from the door they had entered, Taranka was reduced to 3 of his companions. Before Taranka knew it, he was alone after another vanished into the shadows. His allies were either dead or missing. He roared once more at the door. "I will return, Tamura Shigaraki. Don't worry, I'll bring an army of Zoanoids with me, and you'll perish." Taranka snarled while grinning broadly, spotting one of his men across the street. Chong. He hurried over to him, picked up his clothing, and transformed back into a human. "Everyone else is dead, except Hines, who left," Taranka hurriedly exclaimed while putting on his trousers. I looked back at the building and saw Tamura Shigaraki and a few other people strolling out the door. He glanced down at his bare chest, where a glint of metal protruded just above his sternum, and said, "We have to. Slumping to his knees, he stared up at Chong with a look of complete betrayal in his eyes as his mouth opened wide and nothing came out. Horrified, they watched as Chong appeared to tear away, exposing the Himiko Toga grinning maniacally at him. Himiko exclaimed joyfully, "I told you that I would kill you for what you did to me." She withdrew the homemade knife from him and prepared to stab him once more, saying, "I really wanted you to suffer longer." However, Tamura instructed her to halt as he moved slowly forward and put his hand around Taranka's throat. Tamura touched Martin Taranka's throat with all of his fingers and said, "Thus ends Martin Taranka. May he not rest in peace." Taranka's head came off his neck in a matter of seconds after the flesh began to slowly dissolve. Himiko stood and looked down at Taranka, repeatedly wishing she could murder him. Then, snarling, she spat on him and kicked Taranka's lifeless body while grinning broadly. Dabi asked Himiko as he exited the building, is there any more of them? She turned to face him. Himiko inquired, how many did you take out in there? Dabi counted in silence before telling her. One is missing, his name is Hines. This piece of shit's second in command. A real jackass. But a dangerous jackass. Someone that I owe a very unpleasant death. She said and Tamura nodded. Does not matter. Tanka was the threat, this Hines probably is long gone. We have been distracted long enough with this and need to get back to why we formed the League of Villains. For now we relocate and let the police deal with cleaning up the dead bodies. Tamura issued an order and Kurogiri poured over the moving each of them to a different area of the city. Police sirens were heard approaching at that precise moment. Ua campus. The office of the principal. Momo stood a little impatiently outside the office. She took a single step and then turned around to return to her starting position. She arrived 5 minutes early for her meeting, which was scheduled for 3:45 p.m., immediately following classes. Momo was not in the mood to sit, even though the receptionist offered her a seat and smiled at her. She started to silently practice what she was going to say because she wanted to stay nervous. The receptionist returned to typing after saying, Principal Nezu will see you now. Momo walked in after opening the door. The rodent administrator, who was seated behind his desk, grinned at her when he saw her. Momo shook her head when Nezu said, Miss Yaoyorozu. Would you like some tea? He waved his right paw, and Momo sat down. Please sit and tell me why you wanted to speak with me today. He asked, then took a deep breath. Sir, Momo's cheeks started to flush, and she forgot all she had practiced. Nezu said, take your time and relax. Momo nodded after taking a few deep breaths. You had said it is important. Before attending the meeting, Momo spoke with her friends, and they all agreed that living in the dorms was not what they had anticipated. Yes sir, it is. Okay, it is about the dorms sir. Right now I am considering leaving the dorms and moving back home. As is some of the others that reside in our dorm. You told us that we needed to live in the dorms for our safety. Due to the threat of the League of Villains and for me personally Martin Tanka wanting to kidnap me. She breathed deeply and kept going. Well, I personally have been confined to the UA campus and it has been turned intolerable. Mr. Iwaza is adhering to the rules without taking in the fact that some of us have relationships with others. Izuku Midoriya is my boyfriend and I am not allowed to even touch him in the privacy of the dorms. I cannot go out with him or even be alone with him. Without worrying that I will be punished because of the rules that prohibit it on UA campus. Nezu said as she leaned forward. Momo shook her head when Nezu informed her, to give you students a measure of privacy, we have instituted an unwritten policy of don't ask, don't tell. Well, Mr. Iwaza is not following that unwritten policy. He is stifling us, conducting spot room checks of the boys' rooms and patrols of the hallways in hope of catching us breaking the rules. Now Miss Takiyama thankfully is letting us have our right of privacy, but Mr. Iwaza is not and it is not right. Momo told Nezu and then concluded what she had to say with her initial statement. Nezu let out a sharp breath and pointed to the teapot. If this is allowed to continue, then I am sorry but I will have to leave and move back home. No matter the risk. Momo shook her head once more when Nezu asked, are you sure you do not want any tea? I cannot openly oppose the rules that prohibit fraternization on campus grounds, but you are right in the fact that within the dorms which we want you students to treat like your homes, should have a measure of privacy without fearing any type of reprisals. So I will speak with Mr. Iwaza, he said, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Momo stood up and said, we should be treated like adults if we are expected to act like adults. Nezu stopped grinning as she walked away, saying, that is all we are asking for, that and have our right of privacy respected. The students in the other dormitories did not experience the same issues, as Momo Yaoyorozu correctly pointed out. In essence, they were permitted to be adolescents or young adults. Iwaza's obsession with adhering to rules that shouldn't have been applicable to the students once they entered the dorms. He requested that Miss Tegrargi ask Iwaza to come to the principal's office by flicking the intercom switch. Mina, Toru, and Kyoka were waiting for Momo when she returned to the dorms. All three of them agreed with her after she discussed the matter with them. That it was unacceptable to live in the dorms under the same regulations. 2 of the 4 of them in particular had boyfriends they wanted to be able to hold their hands with and not have to worry about Iwaza snooping on them. She hadn't talked to Ochako because when Iwaza had seen Katsuki emerge from her room, the shy girl was still in shock. Ochako was greatly impacted by the verbal dressing down, which Katsuki essentially dismissed. Momo was afraid her other friend wouldn't be able to confront Principal Nezu or confront Iwaza herself. She chose not to ask her as a result. Hines couldn't help but feel a little uneasy as he entered the office building through the main entrance. He entered the elevator, which went down rather than up, despite the building's name indicating that it was the HOSHI Research and Development, even though he knew it was actually a part of the Zodiac Corporation. 12 floors below, there were 2 men waiting for him, both armed and armored. They led him right away into a big room where one of the Zodiac Corporation executives was standing behind a big desk. Although the man was middle-aged and his name was listed as Taylor on the door, Hines could tell that he had a very remarkable quirk that allowed him to rise to the position of executive. Additionally, even though it wasn't his real name, the man might go by Taylor. Part of the Zodiac was secrecy. "Ah, Mr. Hines." Taylor grinned and gestured to a metal chair across from him as Hines entered and stood in front of the man. "Please sit. I hope that you are not wasting our and my time. That could prove disastrous to you. Now Mr. Roger Hines, you contacted us with an interesting offer. One that involves those creatures that have been a minor inconvenience to the local authorities." He grinned broadly. Hines said, a little alarmed, "Yes, sir. They weren't the kind to put up with idiots who squandered an executive's time." Taylor shook his head in mild annoyance as he stammered, "I am one of those. Well, I am a zoanoid. That is what they are called, and a zoanoid is an alien-altered human." He rested his elbows on the wooden desk and leaned onto his hands, saying, "It is true, sir. Alien-altered human. You know, if it was not for the video of the bank robbery in the Caymans and the fact that there is a young man wearing very impressive alien armor, I would think you are lying to me. Thankfully for you, I believe you. So these zoanoid creatures, how is it that you are one of these things?" Taylor inquired, and Hines breathed a sigh of relief. He shared with him what Martin Taranka had told him and everything he knew. As Hines set the bag containing the blood samples on the desk, the other man grinned. "Yes, I believe the director will be most interested in this. Oh, and I believe that we can also assure you that you are now back in the fold. Welcome back, Mr. Hines, to the Zodiac." Hines gave a broad grin. With joy, Hines said, "Thank you, sir. Although being a part of the Zodiac can be extremely risky, the benefits far outweigh the hazards." Hines had made a mistake during the mutagen incident in the Sudan. He had let a volunteer from the Red Cross get away. If the Red Cross doctor had chosen to speak with the wrong people, that might have led to some serious issues for the Zodiac. Fortunately, she was intelligent and joined the Zodiac by applying her knowledge. However, Hines was expelled, and he was fortunate that his error did not result in his death. The man grinned malevolently and declared, "I will not fail the Zodiac again." The man looked at the other person in the room and said, "No, you won't. Next time, Hines, you make a mistake, I am sorry, but it would be the last error you will ever make." Hines was completely unaware of her presence. Taylor said, "You remember Dr. Elizabeth Tanners?" As Tanners moved deeper into the light, the woman grinned widely as he said, "The Red Cross doctor that you let slip away. Well, she is quite knowledgeable biochemist, highly regarded within the Zodiac. I believe what you have said is nothing more than bullshit. It is impossible that some type of serum can mutate or alter a human's DNA so that you can metamorphosis into some type of creature." Tanners said, and Hines stood. The executive nodded in response to Hines' question, "With your permission, sir." Hines transformed into his zoanoid form and roared. He growled, and Tanners grinned. "This is not a quirk, doctor. This is from the serum that enhanced me into this. So what do you say now, doctor?" he said. Tanners turned to the executive and said, "Most impressive. Most impressive. Yes, I can see how this will be most beneficial to the Zodiac. If the serum is indeed within the blood samples, I should easily be able to reverse engineer it. Now, as I understand it, you have a very unimpressive quirk," he replied with a nod. With a growling voice, Hines acknowledged, "Yes, at most, I can make my fingernails grow." Tanners grinned. Hines gaped at Tanners as he asked, "Can you use your quirk in that form?" As a zoanoid, he had never attempted to use his quirk. His claws became remarkably long and sharp as he looked down at his hands. She turned to Taylor and said, "Well, that certainly makes this even more interesting. Sir, if we can incorporate this into some of our foot soldiers and even the executives, then their abilities will increase dramatically." Taylor laughed. Taylor turned back to Hines and said, "I have to tell the director about this. He will undoubtedly want to know." Leaning back, he couldn't help but think that this could put him in a better position. "Well done, Hines. Well done indeed." Tanners nodded as he gave the order, "Get to work on this immediately, Doctor. I expect results within a week. Hines, I am assigning you to assist Dr. Tanners for now. She may need to ask you more about these zoanoids." Hines got up. Following Elizabeth Tanners to her lab, Hines said, "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." While Taylor was reporting, Taylor, Tanners, and Hines were directed by the director to visit the main scientific research labs at the South Pacific, not wanting any heroes or governments to get involved. All three were en route within a day, with the intention of building an entire army of zoanoids with quirk enhancements, inside the Zodiac. The UA dorms, being informed that Martin Taranka was no longer a concern for her. That, for some twisted reason, the vindictive psychopath planned to abduct her. Momo would have loved to go out with her boyfriend now that she was free to leave the UA campus. But regrettably, he had to go to a hearing regarding the results of his most recent Guyver form chest blast test. The Hero Administration and the government wished to prevent him from ever using that destructive weapon again. Particularly considering that it essentially destroyed 2 city blocks on the testing grounds. It was Friday, and Momo was genuinely taken aback when a friend from her early years called. She'd known him since she was 5 years old. The Astoria restaurant was a 5-star restaurant, so she had to dress appropriately when she agreed to meet him there. Deciding on one of her more ornate formal dresses, she felt somewhat guilty as she put on her clothes and combed her hair. As she went downstairs to wait for one of the Yayorozu company drivers to come and take her to see her friend, she firmly told herself, "No, this is not a date. It is just me seeing an old friend." She saw Mina and Toru as she entered the dayroom. Soon, both were heading home to see their loved ones. She was first seen by Mina. Mina remarked, "Wow, that is some outfit." She smiled a little before frowning. Momo nodded when she said, "Wait, I thought Izuku was going to be at the hearing until late this evening." Momo checked her makeup again in her small mirror and said, "Yes, he is. I am going to go see him. An old friend of mine just called." Mina bit her lower lip and winced. Momo shook her head when Mina said, "So you are, you are going to cheat on Izuku." "No, this is not a date. His name is Michael and we have known each other since I was 5. He is just a friend. Nothing more," Momo said with conviction. As she closed her compact and looked to the front, she didn't sound all that convinced. "I'm hoping the car will come soon." Momo frowned and then grinned a little when Toru said, "Well, if he is just a friend then I have to wonder why you are all dolled up. You haven't dressed like this since the island reception." Momo's phone chirped, signaling that the driver had arrived, and she said, "The restaurant I am going to is really fancy. I cannot show up wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I should be back in a couple of hours. See you two later." Toru and Mina shook their heads and exchanged glances. She climbed into the backseat outside and was driven out the UA campus gates. Momo bit her lower lip after whispering, "This is not a date. I'm hoping Toru and Mina would not tell Izuku if he returned early and that they would adhere to the girl code. When she returned, she would." Mina let out a sharp breath on the couch. Mina held up her transparent hands and said, "Want to bet that she does not come back tonight? That she comes back tomorrow morning?" After noticing that someone else was standing just outside the dayroom, Toru said, "Nope, no bet on that one. I cannot believe that she is going to cheat on Izuku. After all we went through to get them back together." Minoru Mineta. The boy turned and walked away. She leaned back and kept waiting for her parents to come so she could spend the weekend at home, saying, "Well, there goes Izuku not finding out." Mina Ishido was planning the same thing. In order to avoid having to watch Izuku discover that Momo was unfaithful to him, the two sat in silence and wished their parents would come sooner. After a few minutes of hesitation, Momo finally got out of the car at the Astoria. She pushed the idea of Izuku's reaction to this from her mind, being aware that he would think she was really unfaithful to him, that someone else was going out with her. Michael had come and seen her just as she was getting back into the car. Michael called out to her, "Hey Momo," and moved away from his own vehicle. His smile was so big that he exclaimed, "Man, it has been years. Geez you, wow." Then extended his arm to give her a hug. After giving Michael a hug in return, Momo said calmly, "Hi Michael. It is good to see you again." Her subconscious continued to pound at her as she tried to smile, that she was cheating on Izuku by going on a date with someone else. She reluctantly accepted Michael's arm when he said, "Come on. We have reservations and I want to hear all about what you have been up to since I last saw you." "What, 6 years ago?" He grinned admiringly and said, I have to say, you look incredible. I always knew you would. Well, wow, you really grew up. Once more, Momo bit her lower lip. She went inside, sat down, and let out a sharp exhale after Michael held out her chair. He sat opposite her and slowly shook his head. Michael said, so tell me, how is the hero training going? And Momo took a deep breath. It is going pretty good. Next week me and my whole class are going for their probationary hero licenses. Well, almost my whole class. My boyfriend Izuku already has his. Momo grinned slightly. Then observed Michael's slight wince. When she asked suspiciously, Michael, you do know I have a boyfriend, right? Michael leaned onto the table and grinned as well. Michael said, then why did you agree to come out with me? And Momo let out a sharp sigh. Michael laughed and shook his head when Momo said, Michael, this is not a date. I am just meeting with an old friend to talk about old times and what each of us has been up to. Oh come on Momo, this is too a date. We are in a fancy restaurant and you are dressed. Well wow, Michael replied. Besides, I cannot believe that you would associate yourself with that. Midoriya. He is nothing but a commoner that got lucky. He stumbled onto some alien device that now gave him the ability to be a hero. I bet if it was not for that, you would not have given him the time of day. He said while picking up the menu. Momo scowled at him, trying no longer to smile. Reminiscent of her first encounter with Izuku Midoriya, she smiled warmly as she recalled the moment he had entered Yaoyorozu Industries. You were wrong, Michael. I met him, and even if he did not have the Guyver, I know that I would have wanted to be with him. Momo said. No matter how she explained it, she was unable to accept that she had done this. Now since you insist that this is a date, and I now know it is one as well, I am leaving, because I have no intention of dating or being with anyone but Izuku. She was going on a date with someone other than her beloved Izuku. Michael chuckled. Now Momo, do not be ridiculous. You know that I am more suited to be with you than that commoner could hope to be. Would it not be best that you, instead of leaving, sit and, well, the night is young and so are we. We could easily go back to my hotel. Michael glanced at her and Momo let out a puff of air. After saying, not a chance in hell. Goodbye Michael. Momo departed and returned to the UA campus in a matter of minutes. She was still baffled by how foolish and unsophisticated she was. She told herself it wasn't a date and that she could meet up with an old friend. She said out loud, of course it was a date, you idiot. And the driver gave her a strange look in the rearview mirror. The driver nodded when she said, Hinjashi, right. She said to the much older man who grinned, on the way back to the UA, could you run through the Burger King? I am starving and really could go for some cheeseburgers. My treat. The Villains League. She was seated across from Tamura Shigaraki and felt a little let down. The intention of Himiko Toga was to be the one to murder Tanka. However, Tamura had killed the man, and Himiko felt that she had been denied the opportunity to exact revenge. The league leader leaned in her direction, and Himiko nodded. In another week you will attend the hero exam in the form of Kami Utsushimi. But I actually need you to do something minor first. That is, if you still can transform into Mina Ashido, that is. She could still do so for maybe a day at most because she hadn't yet changed into the pink girl. Tamura glanced at Kurogiri's shadowy form and said, good. We need a new source of information and I believe we have located the perfect patsy to provide that information. Kurogiri, would you please? The other person moved forward and dropped a photo between her and Tamura. This is Tanaka Sato, administrative executive of the Hero Administration. He is 54 years old, never married, and for a good reason. It seems that Mr. Sato prefers young girls, those that he legally cannot touch. Girls that, let us just say, that are exotic appearing. Abnormal is the polite term. Kurogiri responded with a grin. Himiko took out her knife and twirled the pointed end on her right index finger, saying, oh, I understand. He likes the ones that have been changed because of their quirks. Like that blue slut in the Night Eye Agency or Mina Ashido. Himiko sighed and scowled as Tamura remarked, yes. But I would hamper a guess that he would more than likely be more interested in Mina Ashido since she is 16 years old. Himiko grimaced at the idea of having another older man between her legs and said, let me guess, you want me to fuck him, or rather Mina Ashido fucks him and then what, we blackmail him? Tamura grinned as she said, okay, I'll do it. But there's a catch. Once this Sato is no longer needed, I get to kill him. Of course, I believe that he will be of no further use to us, let us just say after about a month. By that time he will have most of his financial accounts transferred and will attempt to leave the country. So in a month you of course can kill him. Tamura replied with a broad grin. 2 hours later, wearing a shirt and skirt that were extremely short and revealing. Under the name Mina Ashido, Himiko Toga went into a bar that Kurojiri claimed Sato appeared to visit more often than his house or any other location. A number of men gave her wide, appreciative looks as Himiko now Mina entered the bar, genuinely appreciating what they observed. Then Himiko spotted her prey. The man had a receding hairline and a potbelly, and he was not in the best of physical condition. Applying a phony sexy smile, Himiko approached Sato and took a seat on a nearby bar stool, turning it so that Sato could practically see she was naked. She persuaded him to return to her hotel room in less than 15 minutes. The entire sordid encounter was being recorded by the numerous cameras that now covered the room. After entering the room, Himiko had to start acting the authentic one. She pressed her hands against him and attempted to push him away when he drew her closer. In Mina's voice, she said, wait, I do not know if I am ready to do this. Sato continued. He moved his hands from her pink breasts to her thighs while giving her a passionate kiss. Stop please, I have never done anything like this. Please stop, she begged. It was now necessary to insert the nail that would guarantee Mr. Tanaka Sato would comply with the League of Villains' requests. She said, please, stop, I am only 16 years old and I do not want to do this. Naturally, the old jerk did not pay attention. No, even though Himiko urged him to stop, he was too excited about being able to perform Mina Ashido. After pulling a condom from his pocket and hiking up her skirt, he sat her down at the table in the room. He did her, then on the bed twice more. Himiko persisted in pleading with him to stop, perfectly mimicking Mina Ashido. Himiko resisted the urge to cut Sato's throat as he slept with a broad smile on his face. Removing the revealing shirt and short skirt, she let out a breath and glanced up at the closest camera. After saying, well that was disgusting beyond words. Remember the deal. She molted off Mina Ashido's guise. When she was finished and back to her normal self, she took the burned cell phone from her pocket. She grinned as she watched the second video on it. It depicted her returning to her actual self after being Mina Ashido. The purpose of that video was to protect Sato from making the foolish error of confronting the real Mina Ashido. Instead of Ashido, Tamura considered the fact that Sato would be useless to the League if he did that. Himiko put the phone down next to the sleeping man and went back to the League of Villains' hiding place. When Tamura called Sato to share the good news, she wanted to be present. The UA dorms. Coming back from what was a big mistake for Momo, she planned to tell Izuku about it right away. The fact that Izuku had already returned startled her a little. He attempted to smile but was unable to do so. As she put her arms around him for a pleasant embrace, Momo did smile. She could give him as many kisses and hugs as she wanted inside the dorms now that Iwaza was out of the way. Izuku let out a sharp sigh when Momo asked, when did you get back? She thought it strange that he had just given her a hug and was a little unresponsive since her body was pressed against him. Izuku said, a few minutes ago. Then he took a slow breath and grimaced. Momo closed her eyes as he asked sadly, so how was your date? Before she could inquire as to who had spied her, he said, Mineta Minoru told me. Momo took a small step back. As Momo put it honestly, Izzy it was. It was not a date. Well, I did not want it to be. She reached up and gently touched his face with her right hand, saying, okay, let me explain Izzy, please let me explain. His name is Michael, I have known him since I was 5 and I thought we were just friends. I have not seen him in almost 6 years and when he called and asked me to see him, I fully intended to only go as a friend. Nothing more. She inhaled and was happy to see that he wasn't. I swear that nothing happened and nothing would happen. I left him as soon as I realized that he thought that me seeing him was a date. She informed him. Okay, well, I am a bit worried that perhaps you were thinking that maybe we should, break up again. That you wanted to see other people. Izuku replied and Momo nodded her head. Izuku finally smiled when Momo said, not ever and no way. I love you Izuku Midoriya and as you can tell I royally fucked up tonight. Can you forgive me? Leaning in his direction, she pressed her lips to his and inserted her tongue into his mouth, demanding, good if you do, then can you kiss me already? She looked around the dorm when she began to feel aroused. She took his right hand in hers and led him upstairs, saying, most of our friends and classmates are gone for the weekend. I think it would be wonderful if we spent the whole weekend in bed. Directly into her chamber. When Momo woke up on Saturday morning, she drew Izuku closer to her, waking him up immediately. She needed this, she missed it, and she never meant to be without it. She gazed at him while biting her lower lip, making a choice. Izuku grinned at Momo as she said, Izzy. Izuku said, yes and Momo grinned back. She chuckled softly as she began to feel anxious and questioned whether she could pull this off. Yes, she could. Momo glanced at the calendar and quickly determined how long it would be until they graduated, saying, after we graduate from UA in 1 year 6 months and 3 weeks and 5 days. She took a deep breath before considering her next question. When her parents found out, she didn't care how they would respond. One thing was all that mattered to her. She was deeply in love with Izuku Midoriya. As she asked, Izzy, after we graduate, would you marry me? Izuku began to hyperventilate. Izuku exclaimed, what? Izuku grinned at Momo as she repeated, Izzy, I love you and after we graduate, I want to marry you. So at that time, would you marry me? Izuku responded, of course I love you too. Momo gave him a passionate kiss while simultaneously making another condom. As they shared a kiss, he pushed it into his right hand, wishing for another round right away.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.